Chapter 509. Reading. Time Record. Gu Nan, Jiupu, and Lu Wen all sat down. The former two looked the same as before, while only Lu Wen maintained his previous attire. The black and white Taoist robe, the seven-star Taoist crown, and the twin dragon yin-yang symbol between his eyebrows made Lu Wen look extremely handsome, as if he was not an ordinary person. "So, are you going to continue to be this showy in the future?" Gu Nan asked as he looked at Lu Wen. Lu Wen was already used to Gu Nan's style, and smiled without any surprise. "This is my original appearance. As for what Yu Lian has, it's just what she thinks." "Original appearance?" Gu Nan raised his eyebrows. "Previous life." Lu Wen revealed an amused smile. "You know which previous life I'm talking about." Of course Gu Nan knew. The martial granduncle that Yu Lian spoke of was the former trader of Dong Su, the disciple of the second-generation sage, the yin-yang Taoist. According to Yu Lian's knowledge, Lu Wen was clearly the reincarnation of the yin-yang Taoist. But from Lu Wen's words, his current attire was not that of the yin-yang Taoist, but from his real previous life, the crack world. There were cultivators in the crack world, there was no doubt about that. Even a technological civilization like the Blue Planet could develop a basic cultivation system like the Origin Force after a few hundred years of development. It was naturally more normal for a cultivation civilization to exist. Gu Nan, Jiupu, and Huang Quan Taoist all clearly came from a technological civilization. The latter two only knew a little of their history, so they did not have much of an advantage. Gu Nan, on the other hand, had an evil god's temple and a highly realistic game, which gave him the experience of cultivation. His advantage was already far greater than the other two. And now there was Lu Wen, who seemed to have been a cultivator in his previous life. "In my previous life, I stood at the edge of Tao integration, but because I tried to combine two great Taos, I died from Tao punishment." Lu Wen shook his head lightly. No wonder he could reach this step so easily, and was so familiar with the law of space and time. It seemed like he was really the reincarnation of a supreme being. A strange look appeared in Gu Nan's eyes. "That world can also reach this level? Did you not notice the abnormality of the world? Even an ordinary Star Lord would be able to roam the entire spatial rift, let alone someone at the brink of Tao integration. All they needed was enough time. We call that place the original realm. As a starry sky plane, the original realm itself is sufficiently vast, and sealed off." Lu Wen looked at Gu Nan and Jiupu and said, "In my previous world, there were people who had fused the Tao in the civilization. They were also known as saints. But even the saints have never seen the world outside the original realm." Gu Nan's eyes began to show some understanding. According to this method, the great cosmos that the Blue Planet was in his previous life would be the original realm that Lu Wen had mentioned. There was a cultivation civilization here, and there were even experts at the path integration realm. However, it was completely isolated from the outside world. Gu Nan did not doubt this because he had seen with his own eyes the bit wall between the original realm and the outside world. It was so powerful that even he could not break through it directly. He could only descend through a wisp of his will. Based on Gu Nan's limited knowledge from his previous life, the universe where the Blue Planet was located was indeed larger than most of the dimensions. Even the astral world and the Milky Way, which were also starry sky planes, could not compare to the original realm in terms of actual size. "Then how did you get out?" Gu Nan looked at Lu Wen and asked. With Lu Wen's cultivation at that time, he should not have been completely unaware of the process of leaving the original realm. Lu Wen began to reveal a bitter smile. He turned to look at Jiupu, indicating for him to explain this question. And Jiupu did not refuse, sighing and saying, "Under the calamity, just as his soul was about to be destroyed, he was rescued by someone. I have always suspected that it was Yellow Spring, but he never admitted it." Lu Wen also nodded and said, "Back then, I also could not tell who did it. But looking at the time, it is indeed fellow Yellow Spring who is most likely. Gu Nan began to frown. When he combined the information from Jiu Po, Lu Wen, and Yellow Spring Daoist, it gave him a strange feeling. He felt as if something was missing. Jiu Po said that Yellow Spring Daoist went to search for his hometown and disappeared without a trace. He had never seen him again. Lu Wen called his hometown the original realm, but he did not come to the two worlds naturally. Instead, he was rescued by someone, and the time matched with Yellow Spring's disappearance. And Yellow Spring Daoist called the original realm the Crack World. This was because he had indeed found the location of the original realm. It was right in the crack between the two worlds. What Jiu Po said should be true. If he knew the location of the original realm, there was no need for him to waste words with him. He could have gone straight to Yellow Spring. The only possibility was that he still did not know where his hometown was. He had only determined Gu Nan's origins, and from some of his strange actions, he had found out that Gu Nan might have met Yellow Spring Daoist. In reality, if not for the fact that the world of gods did not match the game's history, Gu Nan would not have been able to follow the clues and find Yellow Spring Daoist in the crack. And there was one thing that Gu Nan did not understand. If Yellow Spring Daoist had really rescued Lu Wen, why would he deny it? And why would he let Lu Wen fall into Jiu Po's hands? But if it was not Yellow Spring's doing, could it be that there was someone from the same hometown? Several thoughts circled around in Gu Nan's mind. He did not speak for a moment and just sank into deep thought. Lu Wen and Jiu Po did not disturb him. Seeing that he had made some decisions, Lu Wen said, "The matter of the original realm is in the past. Gu Nan, if you can meet Yellow Spring Daoist and take care of a few old friends for me, that will be enough." "All right." Gu Nan thought for a moment and finally nodded. If there was a chance, he really did want to return to the original realm to take a look. This was not a simple exchange with Fu Qing, but a true dissent of his will. Then, next is the most important matter. Jiu Po finally stood up and said with a smile, "Is what happened just now not important?" Gu Nan asked, pursing his lips. "What happened next is more important," Jiu Po said seriously. "Fan Luan is dead and war is inevitable. It might even affect those at the level of path integration. Gu Nan, if you want to act against the Master God, we can help." Gu Nan raised his head to look at Jiu Po, and then looked at Lu Wen. What are the conditions? He did not believe that these two would help out of the kindness of their hearts. There must be a reason for everyone to do something. Jiu Po smiled and said, "If we ask you to tell us the whereabouts of Yellow Spring, you will most likely not be willing. I'm afraid that we will not be able to completely trust you. As long as the time is right, you can stand on our side." From his words, Gu Nan could hear the bloodthirst that seeped deep into his bones. He could not help but smile faintly. "You want to become enemies with the entire universe? I want to go home." There was no expression on Jiu Po's face. "I have already been a path integration practitioner for tens of thousands of years. I am tired. I just want to go home and take a look." Chapter 510. Reading. When Gu Nan reappeared in the Divine Kingdom, it was already 3 days after he left the timeline. He believed that Jiu Po was telling the truth. If there was no Netherworld Taoist, and he didn't know that there was someone who came from the same place as him, perhaps Jiu Po could have stayed in the various worlds and become one of his great ancient powers. Unfortunately, Netherworld Taoist went to find his hometown, and Jiu Po didn't choose to go with him until he found Zero, Lu Wen, and Gu Nan. If we kill all the main gods and Tao fusing masters of the two worlds and combine the power of the two worlds, maybe we can break the bit wall? Gu Nan touched his chin and thought for a while. He began to agree with this plan. A normal person would probably think of allying with the existing unification masters to find and develop the original realm together. But Jiu Po, who came up with this plan, was obviously not a normal person, and Gu Nan, who accepted it, was even less so. "Let's give it a try." Next, Lorenza. Gu Nan looked at the stack of information on the table. It was all about a person's experiences over the years. This person's name was Dong Sun. The world of gods. 13 main gods. Oh, there were only 12 main gods left now. They gathered together again and discussed Fan Luan's death. We can't pretend that nothing happened. Eugene, the Lord of War, slammed the table. This time it was Fan Luan. Who will it be next? Then what do you think we should do? Daisy, the Lady of Darkness, looked at him with a smile. Kill them, Eugene said without hesitation. Austin also spoke at this time. The mastermind of this is Lu Wen. He has been planning to kill Fan Luan for a long time. Sven, the god of time, is his clone. Gu Nan and the other two acted too quickly. The other main gods couldn't even get to the scene in time and didn't understand the situation at the time. After listening to Austin's narration, they realized that the other party had hidden a clone and attacked Fan Luan in such an unpredictable way. Is there another evil god involved? Kos, the Lord of Nightmares, said in a low voice. He had personally been to many worlds and witnessed Gu Nan's strangeness and strength, so he couldn't help but say, "The evil god's growth is too fast, we don't have time to drag this on. If it was just Fan Luan's death, the dark gods wouldn't have enough reason to make a move. However, if the evil god was involved, no one would be able to stay out of it." After a moment of silence, Lady of Darkness Daisy finally said, "Then, let's start an all-out war." Reality had proven that no provocation was more provocative than directly killing a main god. Starting an all-out war meant that the light and darkness god systems had started to set aside all of their disputes and start a war with the core gods as the vanguard. But ever since the ancient times when the two worlds had interacted with one another, there had never been such a large-scale and high-level exchange of fire. In the past, the two sides did not have much of a conflict of interest, and killing the other side would not bring them any benefit. This caused the war to lack motivation. However, things were different now. The gods were not fighting for benefits, but for their own survival. If the fusing masters of the various worlds were allowed to continue like this, sooner or later, the lords of the Pantheon world would die one by one, and in the end, an all-out invasion would come. And once the core gods took the lead, the gods did not hesitate at all. Immediately, a large number of gods decided to participate in the war. The aftermath of Operation Hunt the Gods had not yet passed. Come to think of it, this was all Gu Nan's fault. The Pantheon world had finally started an all-out war. Wave after wave of god armies surged into the various worlds, their targets being the astral realms of the astral lords. When the gods decided to launch a large-scale invasion, one of the disadvantages of the various worlds was finally revealed. Unlike the god kingdoms that were completely chosen by the gods, the astral lords' astral realms were essentially natural planes of existence. That was why god kingdoms could be built in very remote locations, but the astral lords' astral realms could only adjust their positions slightly, and traces could always be found. In the short span of 3 days since the start of the war, the unprepared worlds had suffered a great loss. Many astral realms had been destroyed by the gods, and the astral lords had lost their foundations. 1,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in a day. The last time the two worlds had started a war, the battlefield was actually in the Pantheon world. It was a war between the gods and the invaders, and the astral lords had never experienced such heartache. When they understood the inside story behind the start of the war, it was not that no one secretly blamed Lu Wen and the others. However, when they found out that Gu Nan was also involved, not many people said anything more. Your reputation among the astral lords is much greater than that of us old fellows. Li Si smiled as he spoke to Gu Nan during the meeting of the fusing masters on the various worlds side. Gu Nan pursed his lips and said, "The more you kill, the better your reputation will be." Li Si did not know how to respond to this kind of person who could chat to death. He could only set his gaze on Monk Fa Kong, who was sitting on the other side. In the face of the Pantheon world's invasion, the 16 fusing masters naturally had to gather and discuss a feasible strategy. This time, it was Yu Lian who had issued the invitation, inviting the 16 fusing masters to the Paradise realm. No matter what their relationship was, it was inevitable that they would meet. Naturally, the 4 who had surrounded and killed Gu Nan 5 years ago were also present. Among them, Song Fei and Hua Kuei had suffered losses. Meng Xian had paid a heavy price, while monk Fa Kong had suffered a great loss. Not only had the sealed nomological laws been useless, but Gu Nan had also turned the tables on them. More than half of the monks in the 3 Buddha temple had died in the aftermath of the fusing masters' battle. Amit Ba. However, monk Fa Kong was a fusing masters after all, and his ability to maintain his composure was not just for show. Benefactor Gu Nan, we meet again. Gu Nan looked at him and said, "Do you still want me to stay at your house?" The corners of monk Fa Kong's mouth twitched slightly. No matter how well-mannered he was, he did not know how to respond to Gu Nan's face-slapping behavior. In fact, it was quite common for fusing masters to attack each other, or even to join forces with others to fight. It was just like how Song Fei had tricked Zhou Jiming back then, and Song Fei had secretly attacked Elder Zi Luo. As long as there was no absolute gap between them, this kind of thing was limited to the stage of seeking revenge. It was rare for them to want to kill each other. That was because if the 2 sides had to fight, not to mention anything else, the 2 astral realms would definitely not be able to survive. It would only end in a lose-lose situation. Monk Fa Kong had tricked people before, and he had also been tricked by others. However, he had never seen Gu Nan so keen on face-slapping. Fortunately, Li Xi helped him out. "Everyone is here. Let's get down to business first." Yu Lian, who was sitting above, also said, "The battle is imminent. No one can stay out of this matter. Now, please put aside your prejudices and unite against the outside world." Gu Nan was the first to reply. "No problem. I can go and kill a master god first." His relaxed tone of killing a master god like killing a chicken caught everyone's attention. "Are you confident?" Yu Lian looked at him and asked, "Who are you going to kill?" Chapter 511. Read. "You really want to make a move on Eugene?" "It's fake." "Then what's your real target?" "None of your business." The above conversation took place after the meeting between Zhou Jiming and Gu Nan, who were adept at getting close to each other. Zhou Jiming, who could easily get close to anyone, seemed to have hit a wall with Gu Nan. But Zhou Jiming did not seem to mind, or perhaps he was already used to such situations. Unable to obtain more information from Gu Nan, he could just leave with a smile, and had no intention of continuing to pester him. There were not many disputes or conflicts in this meeting between the 16. Even though this matter had arisen because of Lu Wen and Gu Nan, this battle was unavoidable. This was something that everyone understood. There was no point in discussing responsibility at this time. This meeting was more about strengthening their resolve to face the external threat as well as formulating their next plan. But any plan seemed insignificant in the face of Gu Nan's, "I'll kill one first." Since Gu Nan had this confidence, the group of fused path practitioners did not mind cooperating with him. After all, if the operation was ultimately unsuccessful, it would be Gu Nan who would lose face. It would only cause his words to be ignored in the future, and they would not suffer any real losses. In the Journal of Time, when Gu Nan, Lu Wen, and Jiu Pe sat together again, the topic of discussion was naturally Gu Nan's. "Do you think that one of us will secretly contact the Pantheon world?" Lu Wen asked. He subconsciously felt that Eugene, the target that Gu Nan had mentioned, was unreliable. Whether in terms of difficulty or strength, Eugene was not the best choice at the moment. In the war between the 2 worlds, Eugene would definitely be the overall commander of the battle formation. There was no doubt about this. To put it bluntly, as long as the war began, he would not leave Austin even half a step. Even if he had to personally enter the battlefield, he would first ensure his own safety. If they could kill Eugene, it would certainly deal a heavy blow to the Pantheon world and cause the entire war system to come to a standstill, but the difficulty was undoubtedly extremely high. There were so many targets that could be targeted, why would they choose the most difficult one? Even if there's no one, we still have to find someone to leak this information. Gu Nan said, even if we know that it might be a diversion, so what? How dare they not guard against Eugene's ambush? Gu Nan took a sip of the green tea on the table. Old Lu, you don't understand what kind of existence the evil gods are in the eyes of these gods. They even believe that I can destroy the world. What else can't they believe? That does make sense. Lu Wen gently stroked the short beard on his chin. He didn't really understand how the sovereigns thought either. At the very least, based on his interactions with Gu Nan, the latter was not a person with self-destructive tendencies. On the contrary, he was excessively rational. In Lu Wen's eyes, as long as Gu Nan made a decision, it would definitely be beneficial to him. For this, he could disregard all morals and rules. Sometimes others thought his actions inconceivable, but in the end he was proved to be right. It was just that, at first others could not see some things. Gu Nan looked at Jiu Po and said, arrange for the person to leak the information. I need to find someone in the 16 kilometers, someone who has no relationship with me on the surface, to do something for me. No problem. Jiu Po immediately nodded. He had operated in the various worlds for tens of thousands of years, and the current 16 Star-Lords were basically all his juniors. There were many like Song Fei who he had invested in and had a good relationship with, but many people didn't know about them. If Song Fei hadn't caused such a huge impact on old man Zi Luo back then, he probably wouldn't have been remembered until now. Within Gu Nan's divine kingdom, he was sitting comfortably in the evil god's palace, waiting for the person Jiu Po had arranged to arrive. After harvesting Fan Luan's sin value, he had taken a big step towards the 13th level. Of course, if he wanted to count on the blasphemer plan, he would still have to wait for a long time. This would take at least 10 to 20 years, and this was after considering the expansion of the sovereign's space and the increase in efficiency. But in reality, with the start of the war between the two worlds, a large number of gods had already fallen, and the blasphemer plan was just meat on a mosquito's leg. It was better than nothing. I still have to rely on the main gods. Gu Nan was very clear about his situation. In the future, every main god would be incomparably precious, and he definitely couldn't let them die at the hands of others. Otherwise, he might end up like the main gods he had nurtured himself. For main gods and Tao fusing cultivators, the level was not too important. At most, it would affect the upper limit of their power. But what really determined combat power was more the nature of the rules and actual fighting methods, and there were many cases of using a single point to break through. In any case, with the astral world and divine kingdom, everyone's power was almost limitless. But Gu Nan was different. His level would affect the strength of his evil god body, and this determined how long he could last in front of the enemy. As for the change in attack power, it didn't mean much, since it would only be a punch if he hit. Teacher, someone's. Yan's voice was slightly anxious. Clearly, this person had not entered through the normal route, but had directly barged into the evil god's palace. It's fine. Gu Nan waved his hand. This was the person that Jiu Po had recommended. Inside the evil god's palace, a travel-worn figure appeared in front of Gu Nan. This was a graceful young girl in a light green dress, and there was a strange pattern drawn on her face, giving her a demonic aura. Apart from Yu Lian and Dream Immortal, this was the only female Tao fusing cultivator in the 16 high school, Qingkong Mu Qishuang. Gu Nan had met every single one of them in the 16 high school. He only had a simple understanding of some of them, while he had a deeper impression of some of them, and Mu Qishuang belonged to the latter. The reason why Gu Nan had a deep impression of her was that she was a Tao fusing cultivator with a very special law. This law was so special that even Gu Nan had never seen it before, and perhaps it had never appeared in the entire world of gods. It was a law unique to all worlds. Ginseng was the name of Mu Qishuang's law. Mu Qishuang could communicate with the Tao of any world. Her cultivation was to constantly understand and communicate with the various planes until she grasped every single detail of them. However, there were not that many planes in the world of gods, and a man-made god nation could not be easily touched by others. Naturally, there was no such law. Jiu Po, do you need my help? Mu Qishuang asked directly after exchanging some pleasantries with Gu Nan. That's right. Gu Nan nodded and said, I need you to help me nurture a person so that he can advance to Tier 5 as soon as possible. It would be best if he could join the Gods Guild and go to the world of gods. As he spoke, Gu Nan handed over all the information regarding Dong Sun to Mu Qishuang. Chapter 512. Read. The Gods' Union had helped a lot when Lorenza became a Lord God. Even Gu Nan himself had participated in the process. As the first leader god to cross two worlds and become a leader god, Lorenza's leveling up process was like crossing a river by feeling the stones. Even the God Union had no experience with this. To ensure absolute secrecy, Lorenza chose to break up her god soul. She gave it to the God Union's members to smuggle it to other worlds. During this process, Gu Nan hid a piece and used it to create a chess piece. That was Dong Sun. Losing a small part of her god soul did not affect Lorenza. She might not have even noticed it, but when this was used by someone with ulterior motives, the whole thing became uncontrollable. In the blue sky. Dong Sun? Mr. This person is. You do not need to know who he is. Just follow what is written here. Yes, Mr. Mu Qishuang watched her people leave. She looked at the file on the table. She had read Dong Sun's information at least 10 times, but she could not find anything wrong. Mu Qishuang was not stupid. Gu Nan was going to attack Eugene, but he was using the 9 spirits to find her, who was not related to him. His goal was not simple. But Dong Sun's experience was nothing special. He was just a normal person in a normal world. He had a lucky encounter, and now, he had break world power. Although his progress was a bit fast, considering the existence of the reincarnation system, it was not rare. Perhaps the key was that he had a lucky encounter? But she could not cut Dong Sun open to see. She had to wait for him to reveal himself. While Mu Qishuang was thinking about Dong Sun's history, Dong Sun was standing inside the purple net. He curiously looked around. Dong Sun had become break world class not long ago, but he had been staying in the original world. He had been busy dealing with the consequences of his past. In some worlds, breaking the world was like ascending. Many people thought after ascending to become a fairy, they could not come back. So, they had to take care of things. When Dong Sun ascended to some major planes, he found that it was not the case at all. He started to understand the nature of this world. He understood the relationship between all the big planes. He gradually understood how to break the world. However, Dong Sun still couldn't find any clues about the origin of the voice in his head or the mysterious person he had seen. With Dong Sun's current abilities, he didn't have the qualifications to investigate too much. He could only ensure that he could survive. As the most renowned neutral plane, the Purple Luo tribe was already extremely renowned. After Elder Purple Luo progressed to the Tao integration stage and forcefully took over the entire Purple Luo tribe, its fame only increased. Although Old Man Z Luo's methods were powerful, he wasn't someone who would suppress the various large organizations. On the contrary, as long as they were willing to cooperate, they would receive better benefits and treatment. In any case, it was better to have a Tao integration stage cultivator as his backer than to rely on himself. To put it simply, Violet Net had transformed from a loose organization platform into a large-scale organization with a unified plan and a complete organizational structure. The absolute core of this organization was undoubtedly the Gods' Union. "This is the Gods' Union," a young girl said to Dong Sun. "However, if you want to join the Gods' Union, it will be very difficult." Dong Sun only smiled. "I will do my best." The girl shrugged her shoulders and said noncommittally, "Then I'll wait for you outside. You should be waiting for my triumphant return." Dong Sun smiled peacefully. He was like a completely different person from his crazy and stubborn self in the past. If one hadn't seen Dong Sun in the past, they probably wouldn't have connected the two of them. The two of them parted ways. Dong Sun walked toward the Gods' Union, while the young girl turned around and walked toward the back. There was already a green-robed man waiting there. "I have done what you wanted me to do. Where is the item?" the young girl asked as she stared at the green-robed man. The green-robed man took out a box and handed it to the young girl. "2 ghost spirit fruit seeds. Relax. Our organization won't miss out on such a small reward." The man's words were very honest. No matter what, he was a trusted subordinate of a Dao integration stage cultivator. He wouldn't miss out on the resources of a world breaker. Plus, if it wasn't for the young girl named Qi Ji, it would have been difficult to get Dong Sun to join the Gods' Union. The task given to them by their superiors was too urgent. They didn't have time to set things up. They had to start with the people around Dong Sun. Fortunately, they discovered Dong Sun had someone like Qi Ji. She had a high desire for practice resources. She didn't mind doing something for them. "Come and talk." The green-robed man smiled. "What do you think of Dong Sun?" "What do you mean?" Qi Ji lifted her lips. "His power isn't bad. He is dumb and easy to trick. That's all." The green-robed man nodded and said, "There will be opportunities like this in the future. Stay with Dong Sun. Do you understand?" Qi Ji no longer doubted the man's wealth. She rolled her eyes and asked, "Who is Dong Sun? Why do you want to set him up like this?" "That is not something you should know." The green-robed man pushed the table and stood up. His body quickly disappeared from Qi Ji's sight. Qi Ji lifted her lips. She looked away and waited for Dong Sun to return. When she first met Dong Sun, she was already a world breaker. She even helped Dong Sun before he leveled up. That was how the two of them got to know each other. Back then, Qi Ji had only done it casually. Now, it seemed like Dong Sun was a big treasure waiting for her to discover. Should I use this chance to get close to him? Qi Ji's head spun with the idea, but she quickly dismissed it. She needed to figure out why this mysterious organization wanted to lead Dong Sun. If they wanted to do something, she would be dragged into it as well. Qi Ji shook her head. As Dong Sun followed Blue Sky's guidance and walked the path that Gu Nan had designed for him, Gu Nan arrived at the border of the two worlds. His destination was the world of gods, but at the border, he ran into someone he didn't expect. "Are you going to do something?" Yulian seemed to have been waiting there for a while. She looked at Gu Nan and said, "Your real target isn't Eugene, right?" There were many people who guessed that Gu Nan was blind, but there weren't many people like Yulian who could figure out Gu Nan's path and wait for him to confirm it. Chapter 513. Read. This god's hatred for the evil gods originated from their fear. Fear that the evil gods possessed too much power and strange methods that would destroy the entire world. The gods' belief in the ancient legends and their reverence for mysticism made them emphasize the terror and power of the evil gods, even if they ignored their experience. In other words, it was better to believe than to risk the destruction of the world. In the world of gods, this kind of thinking would cause Gu Nan a lot of trouble. But in the world where the two worlds coexisted, it became a point that he could take advantage of. When Gu Nan announced that he was going to target a main god, all the main gods had to be mobilized. No one dared to underestimate him. The words that Gu Nan had released during the meeting had already reached the ears of the main gods, but the authenticity of the news could not be confirmed. Since the fusing gods could not come here personally, it would take some time to confirm the news. But the protective measures for Eugene had already been taken. Eugene sat at the rear of the gods' world and directly mobilized the various armies. This allowed the gods' power to be united and unleash 120% of their power. Austin had left a clone here for a long time. If anything happened, he could rush back at any time. In fact, every main god had the will of a top main god watching over them to prevent them from being defeated by the enemy. The light god system had Austin, the Lord of Light and Justice, and Boswell, the Master of Ashen Green. The darkness god system had Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and death god Bayer. The Master of Ashen Green was the oldest main god, and could be called a living fossil among the gods. The death god was not old, but his laws were special. He could be considered one of the main gods with the strongest combat power. Austin was currently out, and Boswell was by Eugene's side. The Master of Ashen Green was dressed in a dark blue robe and held a wooden staff that was taller than a person. He had a long beard and white hair, and even his eyebrows were white. Eugene was still constantly issuing orders and directing the frontline battle. But his efficiency was lower than usual, and he often hesitated. "Relax." Boswell lightly tapped the staff in his hand and said to Eugene, "The evil gods must be destroyed, and they will be destroyed." Eugene let out a long sigh. He did not deny that it was the evil god's words that gave him pressure, but he knew that it was not fear, but caution. If he forced himself to look down on the evil god because of the existence of the evil god, then he would really be affected. "Sir Boswell, are evil gods really that scary?" Eugene couldn't help but ask the doubt in his heart when there was no one around. It was normal for Eugene to use honorifics on the Pale Azure King, given his strength and experience. It was impossible for the sovereigns to not have any suspicions about the heretical god's tomb. Just like what I said before, this was a mindset that one would rather believe in. Among the gods, no one would doubt Eugene's words. Only someone as knowledgeable as the Pale Azure Master would ask such a question. He originally thought that Boswell would quote the classics and use various ways to prove the power or cruelty of the evil gods, but the latter only said one sentence. "Yes." Boswell just nodded. Never underestimate the power of the Diablos. At the rear of the Pantheon world, the old Boswell stood in front of Eugene. His incomparably confident expression shocked the latter. "I understand." Eugene nodded solemnly. He had completely reined in his perverse nature and was dealing with this with the utmost caution. However, just as Eugene made up his mind, an aura began to appear beside the two of them. "He's here." The Pale Azure King's voice stopped abruptly. The staff in his hand was already pointed at a certain corner, and a green beam of light directly hit Gu-Nan out. The oldest god in the world, the Pale Azure King's rank was roughly between the 14th and 15th rank. However, if they were to fight, Austin dared not have absolute confidence in winning. If Gu-Nan was at the 15th rank, he would have some confidence. Unfortunately, he was currently only at the 12th rank. The suppression of rank caused his shadow precept to lose its top-notch concealment ability, and he was unable to launch a sneak attack. "Boswell." Gu-Nan's gaze landed on the Pale Azure King, and he could not help but smile. "I didn't expect that even you would come out." The Pale Azure King and the Demon King Stanley. These two old farts had always been the most mysterious among the main gods, and they would not easily appear in front of others. Unexpectedly, even Boswell had come out this time. The Pale Azure King had no intention of wasting time with Gu-Nan. He waved the staff in his hand again, and a pale azure light began to envelop the entire hall. At the same time that Gu-Nan appeared, the aura of holy light also appeared, and the holy sword once again descended on Gu-Nan's head. Austin had arrived. These main gods did not give Gu-Nan any chance at all. In the blink of an eye, Austin had arrived, and it was no longer possible for Gu-Nan to kill Eugene. Gu-Nan did not hesitate at all, and his figure instantly disappeared. This time, even the Pale Azure King was unable to determine his location. Austin scanned the area with his holy light, and when he did not find any trace of Gu Nan, he immediately said, "He escaped. He has someone else in mind." The main gods were not fools. Gu Nan's sudden appearance and disappearance undoubtedly meant that he had other intentions, and it was most likely that he had another target. Right at this moment, Austin's eyes suddenly flickered, and he quickly disappeared. Daphne. Gu Nan's sudden appearance at the front line of the battlefield where the goddess of nature Daphne was, gave the two main gods a fright. Daphne was one of the main gods who had personally arrived on the battlefield, and her current opponent was Qin Guanru. The two types of laws of life and death quickly alternated, and the entire sky was dyed in two colors. When Gu Nan suddenly appeared, Daphne was shocked and she quickly retreated. This was not the first time that she had encountered a gank during a normal battle. After all, not all the main gods and Tao integration stage beings were ready to reveal themselves, and Gu Nan was not the only one who could think of concentrating their firepower to kill a single person. Daphne's retreat was very timely, but Gu Nan's movements were even faster. Almost in the instant that he appeared, his fist had already landed on Daphne's head. However, this was different from the sneak attack on Van Leeuwen. This time, Daphne could maintain the highest level of vigilance. When Gu Nan attacked, she had already set up a nomological barrier. Even though the barrier was instantly destroyed by Gu Nan's fist, it had still bought her some time, and she had a chance to retreat. More importantly, with Daphne's momentary delay, the holy light arrived again. After being toyed with by Gu Nan several times, Austin seemed to be angry. Chapter 5:14. Read. Torrential holy light descended and engulfed the entire battlefield. Qin Guan frowned slightly. He had seen how terrifying Austin was, and his own laws were slightly restrained by the holy light. It was not appropriate for him to stay now. Hence, Qin Guan did not choose to stay for long. He also quickly hid himself, but he did not leave immediately. Instead, he observed the situation. In any case, Gu Nan was considered a member of the various worlds, and Qin Guan could not sit back and watch him be killed. However, to his surprise, Gu Nan did not seem to be affected by the holy light that he could not resist at all. He took a bath in the holy light before turning around and leaving leisurely. After Gu Nan's aura completely disappeared, Daphne could not help but say in shock, "He got away?" She clearly did not know enough about the characteristics of Gu Nan's shadow law. In fact, after reaching the 12th tier, the evolution of the laws made it harder for Gu Nan to be found. This was also the reason why he dared to do this. "It's shadow," Austin said in a deep voice. In the past, Gu Nan's level was too low, and his enemies often focused on his evil god body and neglected the special characteristics of his shadow law. Now, someone finally realized it. Light and shadow were two sides of the same coin. Even his younger sister was a shadow law user, so Austin understood the special characteristics of shadow very well. This was not a law that was good at attacking, but its concealment and lurking ability were far better than other laws. Austin did not have time to say anything. He disappeared again because Gu Nan had already gone to find his next target. It was Eugene again. At the rear, Eugene, who had just heaved a sigh of relief because Gu Nan had been chased away, finally faced Gu Nan's all-out attack. This time, he did not greet Boswell, and he punched with all his might. The Lord of Pale Cyan reacted extremely quickly. Light instantly enveloped Eugene's body, at least preventing him from being killed by Gu Nan's punch. However, Gu Nan's target suddenly changed to himself. Boswell was flung away. Fortunately, he was not completely without the protection of laws, so he was not killed by Gu Nan in a single blow. The holy light appeared again, and Austin's expression was a little cold. He moved very quickly this time. It was as if the holy sword had eyes, and it landed in the position where Gu Nan was about to go. However, Gu Nan did not dodge and let the sword hit him. Half of his body was instantly destroyed. Countless holy flames invaded his body, as if they were going to completely burn his internal organs. However, Gu Nan only laughed and disappeared again. He had used the power of the shadow law to the extreme. The evil god's body had recovered in the blink of an eye. Austin's eyes were slightly cold. He didn't wait for Gu Nan to take his place and rushed to Daphne's side in advance. But this time, Gu Nan's gaze changed again. Lorenza and Daphne could be said to be the two weakest among the main gods, so Austin didn't have any doubts about Gu Nan's choice. However, he was a little slower this time. It was because he knew that there would be someone else helping him this time. Lorenza's punch landed on the top of his head, but a sickle appeared at the same time, blocking the path of Gu Nan's punch, causing his punch to fail. Ever since Gu Nan had completed his second job transition, this was the first time someone had used the power of laws to block his punch. Evil God. A young man in a gray cloak, with gray hair and beard, walked out slowly from Lorenza's side, sizing up Gu Nan with a cold gaze. Death God Bayer. The Death God was also a god that had gone through several generations. Just like the god of knowledge, almost every generation was stronger than the previous one. It was because the more living things that died in this world, the more powerful the Death God would be. This was the case for generations. Faced with the appearance of the Death God, Gu Nan only pursed his lips and revealed a mocking expression. He did not intend to stay for long either, and disappeared once again under the shadow ripples. No one could catch him, who had the law of shadows, and similarly, no one could instantly kill his evil god body. This meant that Gu Nan could be active behind the enemy's back alone, and he had nothing to fear. But now there were only 4 people left from the light gods, and 8 from the darkness gods. Could they defend? Gu Nan's figure flickered, and he once again hid in the shadows. When he looked back at the battlefield again, he felt like laughing. He suddenly realized that whenever the gods of the darkness gods appeared on the battlefield, they would always be in groups of 2. There would not even be a situation where there were more than 2 groups. It was obvious that the Dark God Systems members had seen him pulling back and forth a few times, so they were prepared. Not to let the 2 main gods protect each other, but to make it easier for the Lady of Darkness and the Death God to keep an eye on them, so that they could rush to the battlefield at the first instance. Interesting. Gu Nan smiled, and then turned to return to the various worlds. He had already made the world of gods afraid to show up too much, and at the same time, he had distracted the main gods. He had achieved his goal. Ziluo. You did it? You really did it? Qi Ji's eyes widened, and she looked at Dong Sun with a shocked expression. Dong Sun seemed to enjoy Qi Ji's expression. He had always been gentle, but now he looked very pleased. Of course, in reality, Qi Ji knew that Dong Sun would definitely succeed. The mysterious organization had spent so much effort to guide Dong Sun into the God Society. How could they let him fail? But Qi Ji's expression did not change. She continued to look surprised, and she tried to probe the mysterious organization's new movements. Now that you have joined the God Society, does the organization have any missions for you? Qi Ji asked. There is one. Dong Sun nodded and frowned. So the God Society is a joint organization between the 2 worlds. The first mission is for me to go to the world of gods. The world of gods? Qi Ji looked confused. This time, she was not faking it. She was really confused. The structure of the 2 worlds was actually quite vague to normal world breakers. Dong Sun had only just found out that the world was like this in the God Society, and the first mission that the organization had given him was to go there and kill a target. After listening to Dong Sun's description and knowing what the world of gods was like, Qi Ji could not help but say, that must be very far. Why don't I go with you? Really? Dong Sun looked pleasantly surprised. He really wanted Qi Ji to go with him, but he did not know how to bring it up. Really? Qi Ji nodded firmly, without a hint of hesitation. This was because just now, a voice had mysteriously rung in her ear. If you go with him, you can get double the reward. Chapter 5:15. Read. New. Flower? Is that you, Flower? Don't call me Flower. The consciousness that had just woken up spoke slowly. Its voice sounded weak. Dong Sun looked surprised. He was staying in a hotel. It was rare for him to have some time alone, so he immediately called out to the being in his head. The wisp of soul that called itself Blossoming Flower had, in fact, been forced to overdraft its own strength in an accident during Dong Sun's growth. It had already fallen into a deep sleep. When Dong Sun reached the break world level, his power was enough to feed the God Soul. Only then did the flower remnant gradually wake up. Dong Sun, on the other hand, was very happy about Hua's awakening. After communicating with the other party, he told the blooming flower remnant soul about his experiences during this period of time. God's union? The God's world? The flower remnant sounded confused. In my memory, that place seems to be related to my origin. Maybe you can see my real body there. Your real body? Dong Sun said with difficulty. If this remnant soul that had accompanied him saw the real body, would it be taken back? As if reading Dong Sun's mind, the flower remnant soul smiled and said, Right now, I am just myself. I have no connection with the real body. If you can reach that step, maybe we can replace her. After Lorenza disintegrated her own soul and successfully reassembled it, this extra divine soul was no longer connected to her original body. Even the memories she obtained were pitifully small. Her memories of her main body also stopped at the level of the 10th level. If she knew that Lorenza had become a Lord God, she would not have thought like this. What's your mission this time? The flower remnant soul asked. After understanding the God's union situation, she suddenly cared about this question. Dong Sun did not hesitate and immediately said, They want me to kill a target. I will only know the specific information when I get there. It was not common to not tell the mission information in advance. Considering that Dong Sun had just joined the organization, and they had never been in contact with an organization like the God's Union, the two of them had no objections. Dong Sun was eager to try. He could not wait to complete the mission and get the reward from the organization. An organization like God's Union gave its members mission rewards. Dong Sun, who was a world breaker from a plane, was shocked. This was only his reward for being an outer member. After all, the official members of the Gods Guild were all gods and star lords. The flowery remnant soul was silent for a long time, as if it was pondering Dong Sun's overall experience. Then, it said, Don't you feel that the process of this system is too smooth? These words caused Dong Sun to be slightly stunned. Recently, he did feel that things were going smoothly, but it was also the result of his hard work, so he didn't feel anything. On the other hand, the blooming flower remnant soul was a bystander. As soon as he heard Dong Sun's description, he felt that there was something wrong. Dong Sun attached great importance to the blossom remnant soul's opinion. After careful consideration, he couldn't help but say, You're right. I'll have to ask for Elder Tang's opinion before the mission begins. Early the next morning, Dong Sun put aside his quest and informed Qi Ji that he planned to return to Black River World. Dong Sun's hometown was Fu World, the famous frontline plane. However, after obtaining the blooming flower remnant soul, he was sent to another world by Gu Nan. It was Black River World. Why are you going to Black River World? Qi Ji asked, puzzled. The mission is about to begin. Aren't you going to the Pantheon world early to prepare? Dong Sun shook his head. My recent experiences seem to have been a little too smooth. I'm going to ask Elder Tang. Qi Ji was slightly shocked. After all, she knew very well that Dong Sun's recent experiences had been deliberately arranged by someone, and even she was involved. Who's Elder Tang? Qi Ji suppressed her emotions and changed the topic. She had known Dong Sun for quite some time, but she didn't know much about his experiences before he broke the world. A senior worthy of respect, Dong Sun said seriously. Black River World. What a rare guest! An old man in plain clothes smiled as he looked at Dong Sun and Qi Ji. Dong Sun, what brings you here? Elder Tang. Dong Sun bowed obediently, and then introduced the two of them. Qi Ji only bowed politely. She nodded and stood behind Dong Sun. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have much of a relationship with Elder Tang, and he was just a normal person with a supernatural power. She didn't care much about him. If it wasn't for Dong Sun, she wouldn't have even looked at the old man. As for respecting the old and loving the young, that didn't apply to world breakers. Perhaps Elder Tang was even younger than Qi Ji. Before Dong Sun leveled up, Elder Tang had helped him a lot. He had built his own faction in Black River World. Elder Tang, I'm here because I have something I hope you can help me with, Dong Sun said. He summarized his questions. After hearing that, Elder Tang frowned. He asked Dong Sun a few more details. After a moment of silence, he spoke. Based on the experiences, it does seem like there is a big power involved, Elder Tang said quietly. But what? Qi Ji spoke first. She was the one who was most concerned about Elder Tang's answer. Elder Tang looked at Qi Ji for a moment. He shook his head and said, "The God Society is backed by someone from 16 High School. No one can control them." 16? Dong Sun repeated with confusion. He didn't know much about the big factions of the 10,000 world. For example, he knew Zi Luo was very powerful. The God Society was powerful, but he didn't know how powerful they were. 16. Qi Ji was different from Dong Sun. She didn't know the background of the God Society, but she had at least heard of the name 16. Dong Sun was still confused, but Qi Ji reacted. She said, "If it is someone from 16 High School, then there is no need to worry about the God Society manipulating them. That is impossible." Elder Tang agreed. "Not bad. Dong Sun, at least you don't have to worry about someone plotting against you when you join the God Society. On the other hand, if you are targeted by a big power, the God Society can be your shield." With Elder Tang and Qi Ji's confirmation, Dong Sun felt a lot more at ease. He felt like he was being a bit paranoid. He was just a normal person who had a lucky encounter. Why would so many big powers be looking for him? Chapter 5:16. Read. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave. Dong Sun was in a good mood after receiving a satisfactory answer, so he immediately took his leave. He was in a hurry to return to Ziluo and prepare to head to the Pantheon world to complete the Gods Union's mission. Dong Sun had already made up his mind to obtain a certain status in the Gods Union. If he were to encounter a mighty figure in the future, he would be considered someone with a backer. However, after hearing the name of 16, he inexplicably thought of the silver-robed, masked man he had met years ago. He was originally from the Palace world, but he had been forcefully sent to the Black River world. The silver-masked man had even left a black sword in his body. If there's a mighty figure spying on me, it probably has something to do with him. I wonder how he compares to 16? Dong Sun thought to himself. It was a pity that he did not know what he looked like back then. Otherwise, it would not have been difficult to trace his identity. After Dong Sun and Qi Ji left, Elder Tang slowly relaxed. However, another person slowly appeared before him. If Qi Ji were here, she would definitely recognize this person as the green-robed man who had given her resources and the mission. Well done. The green-robed man smiled and nodded. Clearly, he had heard the entire conversation between Elder Tang and Dong Sun. Elder Tang's face was expressionless. He only smiled and said, "I wonder which subordinate of 16 High School does Sir belong to?" The green-robed man's hand paused slightly. He raised his head and looked at Elder Tang. "You know this too? You don't seem like someone from this plane." There was no reason for someone from this plane to be so familiar with Dao integration forces. Elder Tang shook his head lightly as if this was nothing. Of course, ordinary people can't control the one behind the Gods Union. However, if he's also from 16 High School, it shouldn't be a problem for him to do some things. The green-robed man's expression became slightly more solemn. he said in a low voice. It's best not to investigate things that you shouldn't know about. Of course. Elder Tang smiled. I have no intention of going against a certain Sir. Dong Sun is just a friend I met long ago. He disassociated himself from Dong Sun, implying that if a certain Sir was interested in Dong Sun, he would not interfere. The green-robed man looked at him deeply. His figure quickly disappeared and reappeared in front of the others. Go and investigate this Tang guy, the azure-robed man said to his subordinates, especially what he did before coming to the Black River era. Not a single thing can be omitted. Yes. The subordinates hurriedly responded and left. However, one person walked over from behind. This person might be a variable. Should we inform the Lord? Forget it, there's no need to trouble you with such a small matter. The green-robed man thought for a while and finally shook his head. He recalled Mu Qishuang's expression when she told him about this matter. It shouldn't be too important. Just as Dong Sun had joined the Gods Guild and was about to embark on his journey to the Pantheon world, the war between the two realms seemed to have paused for a moment. The number of main gods had decreased, but the gods under them were still constantly invading the various worlds, with the goal of destroying the astral realms that had main gods. This was because the two sides were far more determined than before. They began with a battle between sovereigns. As a result, after a long period of fighting, the highest level of combat power on both sides were somewhat fatigued. In fact, many important figures had already been injured, so the frequency at which they attacked had naturally decreased. In fact, in terms of peak combat power, the Pantheon world should be inferior. After all, they only had 12 main gods, while the various worlds had 16. However, in comparison, the fusing gods were indeed not as united. Yulian also did not have the prestige of Austin, Daisy, and the others, who could directly order everyone to participate in the war. For example, the God Emperor Zhao Renwang, Jiu Po, Si Yun, and the others had not taken action until now. Instead, Lu Wen was quite active. This could not be helped. As the main culprit behind Fan Luan's death, he was given special attention by the gods. There were even people who directly went to his chronology to cause trouble. On the other hand, because of the evil god Gu Nan's ferocious reputation, the ordinary gods were all warned by the main gods. As a result, not many people dared to disturb Gu Nan's god kingdom. As the main gods and the fusing gods gradually calmed down, this meant that both sides had entered a phase of war of attrition. They were fighting with human lives on the line to see who could last the longest. Of course, a large part of the reason why the main gods did not dare to show themselves was because of Gu Nan. The fact that the main gods had entered a phase of attrition in advance was because of Gu Nan. In the blue sky, Mu Qishuang looked at Gu Nan, who was sitting comfortably on a chair, and asked with her head tilted, "What do you plan to do?" During this period of time, Gu Nan had remained in the blue sky, personally controlling Dong Sun's actions. Mu Qishuang was just a cover. She could not perfectly realize Gu Nan's intentions, so he had to personally control this matter. Dong Sun will kill someone he shouldn't have. There was nothing for Gu Nan to hide, so he said casually, when Lorenza finds out, she'll definitely send people to capture Dong Sun. As the executor of Gu Nan's plan, the information about Dong Sun's mission could not be hidden from Mu Qishuang. Therefore, she knew very well that Gu Nan's true target was Lorenza. So what? Mu Qishuang thought about it carefully, but did not understand what kind of trap there was. The other person is just a character. Lorenza can just send people to kill Dong Sun. She won't. Gu Nan said with certainty, Lorenza will definitely capture Dong Sun and kill him herself. When she does so, she'll get a surprise. Mu Qishuang's eyes narrowed. The person you want Dong Sun to kill, who is it? Lorenza's former teacher. The poisonous fruit that was Dong Sun was close to ripening. He just had to wait for Lorenza to find out and eat him. However, at this moment, Gu Nan suddenly left the blue sky. An unexpected situation had forced him to rush to the crack world. This place, which Lu Wen called the original realm, was something Gu Nan wanted to investigate after he killed Lorenza, but now he had to return early. The wisp of will he left here told him that there was news from Fu Qing that the first third transition player had appeared. Gu Nan's will invaded the crack world and immediately read all the information about this player, as well as his entire gaming history. This was a homebody called Li Han, who was passionate about all kinds of role-playing games. After trying a dozen different methods, he finally succeeded in leveling up his in-game character to the level of the third transition 16th, becoming the true king of Pantheon. His progress far surpassed other players. Chapter 5:17. Read. Fu Qing had made the game Radiant Origins very successful. In the Blue Star Federation, Radiant Origins had become a trend. Almost all console players would get their hands on one, and there were more and more high-level players. However, the appearance of a third transition player so soon was somewhat out of Gu Nan's expectations. Gu Nan projected his will onto the Blue Star once again. He found a random person to possess and went to Fu Qing's home. According to his previous instructions, Fu Qing had already left all the information here. Perhaps because Gu Nan usually communicated with Fu Qing in the form of a notebook, the latter chose to print all the information on paper and hand it over to Gu Nan. In this era of advanced technology, it was actually rare to still use paper to record information. Fortunately, there was not much information on Li Han. Even if all the information was printed out, it would only be a document as thick as a finger. Fu Qing's home was a two-story villa. Gu Nan quietly entered and then walked into Fu Qing's study. He swaggered inside and slowly read through Li Han's information. The information obtained through writing was limited. It was only then that Gu Nan was able to see the full picture of Li Han's information. This was a seemingly ordinary otaku player. To be the first to complete the third transition and leave the second place far behind, no one would believe that he was not a die-hard otaku. Of course, just being an otaku was not enough. To achieve this, apart from investing a lot of time, one also needed extremely high gaming talent. For example, Gu Nan was an expert gamer. This was not the reason, but the result. It was because Gu Nan was a gaming genius and had gone through a lot of training to get to where he was today. It was the same for Li Han. In the photo, Li Han was a slightly delicate-looking boy. He was 26 years old this year, and there was nothing unusual about his life. He grew up in an ordinary middle-class family. Although he was not very rich, he did not have to worry about food and clothing. He loved gaming from a young age and became a freelancer when he became an adult. In this era, being a freelancer was no longer a derogatory term. Instead, it had become a synonym for those with special skills. Many people envied them for not having to work from 9 to 5. They could allocate their time freely, and their income was quite considerable. Li Han made a living in the gaming industry. His daily income was mainly made up of game guides, game videos, copyright fees, and a portion of consulting fees. Gu Nan was actually quite familiar with this kind of daily life because he was in a similar situation back then. As for Li Han's gaming journey, it was not much different from what Gu Nan had expected. He basically followed the train of thought given by the officials and walked step by step to the third promotion. Although there were some tricks involved, they were still within the scope of permission. Just like Gu Nan himself, he had tried leveling up twice in a row. These were all unique strategies. All in all, he was a normal player in real life and in the game. The only abnormal thing was that he didn't disappear. Yes, after Li Han completed his third promotion and theoretically completed the entire Radiant Origins game, he was still living a normal life on the blue planet. To him, Radiant Origins was like an ordinary, excellent game. He had poured 5 years of his youth into it, but that was all. There was no such thing as time travel or leaving the world through the crack. What does this mean? Is it that the conditions have not been met, or that another Li Han has already appeared outside. Gu Nan's imagination ran wild as he tried to guess the possibilities. It was reasonable to say that the conditions were not exactly the same. After all, this was just a copy of Gu Nan's game. Whether it was the game itself or the timeline, there were no variables that were controlled. However, if it was the latter possibility, it seemed a little funny. Gu Nan seemed to see himself hundreds of years ago on the blue planet. After completing his third promotion, he continued his mediocre life and slowly walked toward death. But now, after just a few hundred years, there was no trace of him left. These thoughts only stayed in Gu Nan's mind for a moment before he immediately expelled them. No matter what the truth was, he was already a 12th-stage Dao integration cultivator. No one in this world could easily erase his existence. Whether the people being thrown out of the world through the cracks was a natural phenomenon or someone was really manipulating it, it did not prevent Gu Nan from finding out the truth and then killing the threat to him. On the contrary, Gu Nan became even more determined. When he returned this time, he would instruct people to pay attention to a person named Li Han and the new Holy Light attribute cultivator. Maybe Jiu Po is right. Gu Nan touched his chin and muttered to himself, only by controlling both worlds can it be the most convenient way to explore the secrets here. On the other hand, since he had come to the world through the cracks this time, should he visit Lu Wen's hometown? Gu Nan was also interested in the cultivation civilization that existed on the blue planet. According to Lu Wen, there were Dao integration cultivators here. Perhaps they had a different understanding of this world. Just as Gu Nan was thinking about this, the sound of footsteps came from outside, and then the sound of the door being opened. "Mom, who are you?" A girl with light gray hair exclaimed, pointing at Gu Nan. This was Fu Cheng's daughter, Chen Jingjing. Her surname was like her father's, and even her hair color was the same. Fu Cheng's ex-husband was a quarter white. Chen Jingjing had just returned home and was looking everywhere to see if Fu Cheng was at home. She did not expect to meet such a stranger. 5 years had passed, and Chen Jingjing was now an 18-year-old girl. At least she did not lose her cool and did not shout all the time. She just looked at Gu Nan warily. The latter did not look like her mother's friend, but more like a burglar. "There are surveillance cameras everywhere near my house. No matter how you came in, you must have been seen." Chen Jingjing took a deep breath to keep her voice from trembling. "If you go out now, I can pretend that I didn't see anything." Gu Nan's indifferent gaze swept over her, and he had no intention of saying anything to her. He just slowly walked towards the window. Under Chen Jingjing's astonished gaze, Gu Nan manipulated this body to open the window, and then jumped out. Bang! A soft sound rang in Chen Jingjing's ears. She hurriedly ran to the window, only to see that the stranger had already landed firmly on the ground and was walking forward unhurriedly. Chen Jingjing swallowed her saliva and looked down. Her house was a high-rise villa. Even though there were only 2 floors, the height was close to 7 or 8 meters. Was he an expert who cultivated force? Chapter 518. Read. One after Gu Nan left Fu Cheng's house, he found a random river and jumped in before withdrawing his consciousness. Even though it had been 5 years since 2 people died mysteriously, because they were both related to Fu Cheng, some people would still connect the dots. For now, Gu Nan did not want the Blue Planet civilization to understand him, and he did not want them to know about high-level cultivators. After his consciousness left Blue Planet, Gu Nan tried to find Lu Wen's hometown, but the original realm was vast enough. The nature of the starry sky plane determined that it was much larger than the major astral realms. Even with Gu Nan's current realm, it was difficult to quickly scan the entire plane. And Lu Wen could not possibly give the coordinates of the civilization, so it would take some time to find it. Gu Nan left a part of his consciousness to search here, and at the same time, sent a clone to Blue Sky to keep an eye on Dong Sun's progress. Dong Sun had already arrived at the Pantheon world. Along with him was Qi Ji, who treated him like a cash cow. However, the two of them had a thrilling journey, and it was not peaceful at all. After all, the two worlds were still at war. Going in and out of the two worlds was considered illegal immigration. Once caught, it would not end well. Only the Celestial Society was bold and skilled, and they relied on the fact that there were people in the Pantheon world to receive them. Of course, even in the Celestial Society, both sides were looking out for each other. If Dong Sun did not have the special care of Blue Sky, he would not have been given such a mission. We're finally here. Chi-ji let out a long sigh, grumbling. They had suffered a lot along the way. If not for the fact that she wanted to follow Dong Sun and see if there were any new missions to accept, she would not have been willing to suffer. Dong Sun comforted her, and Chi-ji was also a world breaker. She would not let her actions affect her emotions, and the two of them quickly began the mission. When they arrived at the Pantheon world, the Celestial Society members had already passed the mission information to Dong Sun. This time, he needed to kill an old man called Claude. He was once a top legendary powerhouse, but now that he was getting older, his strength had regressed. An ordinary-looking old man had offended the Heavenly God Society in some way, and they had sent him to kill him. However, it was not as if Dong Sun had never joined an organization before. He knew the principles of these organizations. They were to complete the mission properly and not ask too many questions. Old Claude was at Atrenza, the place that Gu Nan was most familiar with. This was the most important continent in the game, where many important NPCs gathered. At the same time, it was also the intersection of major quest clues, and Claude was one of them. The relationship between Claude and Lorenza was extremely complicated. He was Lorenza's teacher, and at the same time, Lorenza had once admired him. He had almost become the goddess's lover. But in the end, after Claude noticed this phenomenon, he resolutely left his proud disciple and completely cut off this relationship. Claude knew very well that Lorenza's path could not be filled with love. Otherwise, she would die on the path to igniting the godfire. It was never easy for mortals to become gods. When Lorenza finally became the goddess of flowers and came back to look for Claude, her teacher was already very old. Of course, the lifespan of mortals couldn't compare to that of gods. Claude was able to live until now because of Lorenza's divine power. She turned Claude into her oracle, so that he could live forever while bathed in divine power. The price was that Claude could no longer advance, and the two of them were completely different. Is the target an oracle? Dong Sun carefully read the mission information. It mentioned Claude's identity, but of course, it didn't include his past with Lorenza. Even the name of flowers was deliberately hidden, so Dong Sun didn't notice anything unusual. However, the remnant soul of flowers found the name Claude strangely familiar. I feel like I've seen him somewhere. Unfortunately, she was only a part of Lorenza's soul and inherited too few memories. Obviously, she wouldn't have such a deep memory as Claude. Chi-ji said, "The target's strength is similar to ours, maybe a little weaker. He lives a very regular life. It seems that the main goal this time is to prevent him from escaping." Claude lived in a small, remote town as an old knight. No one knew how old he was or where he came from. He repeated the same life every day and didn't practice martial art. Most of his strength was wasted. With Dong Sun and Lorenza's strength, it wasn't difficult to defeat Claude. Instead, they had to think about how to kill him and how to escape from the gods after killing him. Claude was already very old. His hair was white, and he habitually carried an old man's cane when he went out. Only his spirit was not bad and his eyes were bright. The god's gift made him immortal, but it didn't give him the motivation to live. He could only live like this day after day, watching his friends and family grow old one by one. Sometimes he wondered if it would be better if he just died like that. But Claude knew that it was impossible, because every time he was in mortal danger, the divine power from the goddess of flowers would protect him. As an oracle cared for by the main god, he naturally received such preferential treatment. Claude walked on the road as usual. He didn't like riding in a carriage, and preferred to move forward on his own feet. The next moment, a dim light suddenly appeared in front of Claude. It was a sharp sword that pierced through his heart, trying to end his life. Dong Sun had been preparing for this sword for a long time. With his current realm and years of experience in life and death situations, Claude was no longer able to fight against him. Old Claude watched the tip of the sword pierce through his heart, but there was no expression on his face. Would he still be saved by the divine power? Or would the divine power heal the wound? Claude, who was used to this, was still waiting quietly. However, to his surprise, the moment his divine power soared up, it instantly retracted because it came into contact with Dong Sun's nomological laws. Claude looked at this scene in shock. His heart was completely destroyed, and his body fell heavily to the ground. Is it that simple? Dong Sun looked at the ground doubtfully, confirming that the target was indeed dead. Qi Ji also appeared beside him. She didn't attack immediately to prevent Claude from escaping, but she didn't expect that she wouldn't be needed at all. Dong Sun was a little puzzled. This mission was too smooth, and the target clearly had an extremely noble aura. Why did it suddenly disappear? It wasn't until a voice sounded in his head that Dong Sun realized something was wrong. We may be in big trouble. The voice of the remnant soul of flowers was a little shaky. This old man is the oracle of my main body, and his divine power also disappeared because of me. Chapter 519. Read. 1. I've been discovered. A trace of panic flashed through Dong Sun's heart. However, he was not a rookie, so he quickly calmed down. Will you be taken back by the main body? If there's still a chance, let's leave this place immediately. Having been with the Blossom Remnant Soul for many years, Dong Sun certainly knew that she had developed self-consciousness and was definitely not as simple as a clone of the main body. She definitely did not want to see the main body like this. However, at this point, some things were out of their control. It's too late. The Blossom Remnant Soul's voice sounded again. This time, it was no longer trembling, only deep despair. Dong Sun's heart turned cold, and he subconsciously wanted to leave this place, but he obviously did not know what it meant for the gods to have a messenger specially taken care of. In the blink of an eye, 2 divine lights had already landed in front of them. 2 tall messengers stared at Dong Sun coldly. It's him. One of them seemed to have confirmed Dong Sun's identity, while the other nodded and reached out to grab Dong Sun without the slightest hesitation. Dong Sun did not put down the longsword in his hand. He simply stabbed it at the man while retreating rapidly. Unfortunately, his resistance seemed to be useless. The other party just waved his hand lightly and broke the longsword. Instead, he grabbed Dong Sun's shoulder with one hand, making him unable to move. Just this casual grab made Dong Sun feel that the laws all over his body were suppressed, and he could not move at all. He could only watch helplessly as the opponent attacked. It was the first time Dong Sun had faced such an enemy, but he already realized what it meant. Star Lord. The strength of a Lord God's messengers was that they could even break through the limit of rank 4 after borrowing the divine power of a Lord God. Even the most ordinary rank 5 was not something a legendary powerhouse could fight against. Dong Sun had no ability to resist at all. The Blossom Remnant Soul in his mind immediately fell asleep and sank into the depths of Dong Sun's consciousness, trying in vain to escape Lorenza's search. Although she knew that it was almost impossible to succeed, there was nothing else she could do. After the 2 of them grabbed Dong Sun, they immediately took him away. They did not even look at Qi Ji from beginning to end, as if the latter was just an insignificant character. After Dong Sun was taken away, Qi Ji turned around and looked around, but she did not see anyone from the Celestial Society. She finally realized something. Did you kill Claude? Lorenza's calm and indifferent gaze fell on Dong Sun's face like moonlight, making him feel like he had nowhere to hide. Yes, yes. Dong Sun felt that his entire body was out of his control as he subconsciously answered. Lorenza sighed softly. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and her impression of Claude had become a little blurry. There wasn't much of their friendship left, otherwise, the latter wouldn't have been killed so easily. If Lorenza had paid attention instead of simply protecting Claude with her divine power, she would have been able to save him. But now that things had come to this, Lorenza wouldn't regret it. Perhaps ending this immortal life was a good thing for Claude. Why did you kill him? Lorenza's voice was still calm, but the power that could penetrate people's hearts had not weakened. Dong Sun was just a break-world person. He could not hide anything from the leader god. He honestly said, I am a member of the Sky God Group. This is an organization mission. The Celestial Deity Society? Lorenza raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected this answer. Because of what had happened to Gu Nan, she was no longer a member of the Celestial Deity Society. Her first thought was that the old man Zi Luo was seeking revenge for what had happened. But then she dismissed that possibility. The old man had no reason to know who Claude was, and it was pointless for him to seek revenge on her. Lorenza's gaze landed on Dong Sun's face. It was as if she wanted to stab deep into his brain and see what was deep in his soul. The resistance of that wisp of remnant flower soul was obviously of no use at all. In front of Lorenza, there was no room for her to hide. It's my soul. Lorenza recognized what the remnant soul was the moment she saw it. It's from that time she remembered how, in order to become a leader god, she had split her soul and sent it to the heavenly world. She did not expect a part of it to be left outside. But now, this soul had appeared in such an unexpected way. Is it purely an accident, or is someone doing this on purpose? The leader's subconscious caution made Lorenza wonder if there was something hidden behind this. Go and investigate, Lorenza's voice sounded among the god emissaries. It's my turn. Gu Nan's voice sounded as he slowly got up from blue sky. Mu Qishuang already knew his entire plan and knew that he wanted to use this to kill Lorenza, but she was not very optimistic about Gu Nan's plan. The reason was simple. She did not think that with a leader's cautiousness, he would easily step into Gu Nan's trap. Even if Gu Nan asked Blue Sky to appear as a cover so that Lorenza's investigation would not take effect, but the whole thing still lacked a source of motivation. To put it simply, Lorenza had no need for remnant souls. She could absorb them to step into the trap, but she could also be cautious and not absorb them. She only needed to keep the remnant souls in her hands and not be controlled by others. You don't know Lorenza well, Gu Nan said. She will definitely not accept something that comes to her doorstep. But sometimes, being cautious may not be enough to prevent the poisonous fruit from entering her mouth. Gu Nan looked at Mu Qishuang and said, if she finds out that I'm the one behind this, she will send Dong Sun far away and find a place to completely destroy him. What if it's me? Mu Qishuang cooperated and played the supporting role. She will want to see what you're trying to do. Blue Sky. Lorenza did not have to spend much effort to find the person who was controlling Dong Sun. After so many years, the celestial gods had become a rather complicated organization. Mu Qishuang could control Dong Sun from inside, so Lorenza could naturally find traces. Just as Gu Nan expected, she quickly brought Dong Sun back after a moment of silence. Lorenza tapped lightly with her finger, and Dong Sun felt a chill between his brows as if something was being pulled out. His heart was cold. He knew that in the end, he would not be able to protect the Blossom Remnant Soul. Although Lorenza had taken out the Remnant Soul, she had no intention of absorbing it. Instead, she completely enveloped it with the power of laws, trying to destroy her own Remnant Soul. What are you trying to do? She said softly. Using the threat of destroying the Remnant Soul, she tried to force the person behind the scenes to make a stand. If he did not make a stand, then she would only lose a wisp of her remnant soul. She had no intention of taking it in the first place. However, what Lorenza did not expect was that, after the remnant soul left Dong Sun's body, another force in his body began to awaken. Chapter 520. Read. 1. Lorenza was very cautious. She knew how many chances the hidden enemy would have if a strand of soul wandered outside. It was much more effective than hair or flesh. So, she had no intention of accepting the soul that was delivered to her. Instead, she was determined to destroy it and find out the intention of the mastermind. However, at this moment, she suddenly sensed an inexplicable energy fluctuation. Dong Sun couldn't move, but he could feel the power in his body boiling. Then, he felt a pain in his chest. A pitch-black sword instantly pierced through his chest, targeting Lorenza. An evil god. At this moment, Lorenza not only recognized the enemy, but she also understood the details of the whole thing. Using the separated soul to attract her attention and bring the hidden power into the divine kingdom. That was the enemy's real goal. For Gu Nan, the biggest problem in killing a chief god was actually how to get close to them and attack when they were unprepared. If they were already prepared, like Eugene, Daphne, and the others, it was actually far from easy to kill. With Gu Nan's current power, if he was directly hit by the evil god's body, Austin would probably lose a layer of skin. The only problem was that he couldn't hit. Earlier, when he ambushed Daphne, the highly vigilant nature goddess had already dodged in advance before he actually attacked. She used the laws to slightly delay Gu Nan's movements, and finally escaped. But even a chief god couldn't be in a state of vigilance all the time. When they were relaxed, it was the perfect time to assassinate them. That was what Lorenza was doing right now. Most of her attention was on the remnant soul. She wanted to see what Mu Qishuang's intentions were after all these things. It wasn't that she didn't check Dong Sun, but with the remnant soul of the flowers before, she completely concealed Gu Nan's power. She only showed her fangs now. The black dagger was as fast as lightning, and it reached Lorenza almost as soon as it appeared. Before Lorenza could block the dagger with the laws, she found that the dagger stopped on its own and exploded. The aura of shadow instantly filled the divine kingdom of flowers. A figure appeared from it and instantly punched Lorenza's head. The shadow dagger was not a killer move, but a springboard for Gu Nan's descent. From the appearance of the dagger to the landing of Gu Nan's punch, the whole process was done in one go. He did not give Lorenza any time to catch her breath. Lorenza's divine body shattered without any suspense, and Gu Nan didn't stop at all. He turned around and began to destroy the flowery divine kingdom. Previously, when they had surrounded and attacked Fanluan, this part of the work had been done by Jiu Po and Lu Wen. However, in reality, Gu Nan was equally proficient in this. He stabbed the shadow sword into the ground with one hand, and endless shadows quickly spread out, covering the entire divine kingdom in the blink of an eye. Gu Nan was already at the 12th level of the Law of Shadows, so he was very familiar with these things and did not feel any pressure at all. One by one, the oracles were dragged into the shadows or killed by the pitch-black figures that appeared. They had no chance to resist at all. In just half a quarter of an hour, the entire divine kingdom had completely fallen into the enemy's hands. The efficiency was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. After her divine body was shattered by Gu Nan, Lorenza, who had not shown herself all this time, finally reformed her body after losing the ability to control the laws of nature to resist. Evil God! You really are the source of all evil, Lorenza said in a low voice, but her body began to emit a blood-red glow. Her divine kingdom was invaded, and many of her people died. She had been forced into a desperate situation. However, Lorenza was a ruthless person who had dared to split her own soul even before she had become a Lord God. Now, she had no intention of sitting still and waiting for her death. Instead, she was going to fight for her last chance. Endless blood burst through the borders of the divine kingdom. On every continent in the world of gods, a blood-red light could be seen shooting into the sky, drawing a blood-red rainbow in the sky. All the lords moved in unison, rushing towards the flowery divine kingdom. During the battle, everyone's attention was on the front lines. They did not expect that someone would attack Lorenza in the rear. In the flowery divine kingdom, endless blood light pierced into Gu Nan's body. At the same time, Gu Nan's fist blew up Lorenza's head. Between life and death, Lorenza made the most resolute decision. She would use her own life as the price to force Gu Nan to stay. As Lorenza's flesh and blood flew everywhere, Gu Nan's sin value skyrocketed again. He had already surpassed the limit of rank 13, but it was too late for him to level up. The remaining 11 main gods had already arrived. Lorenza had already fallen, but the blood light she left behind was the last of the divine kingdom's power, trapping Gu Nan like a cage. Even though Gu Nan had broken it with a wave of his hand, the moment it stopped him, Gu Nan could not escape immediately. Hence, the holy light arrived. As expected of Lorenza, Austin was still the first to appear. He swung his holy sword without hesitation, sealing off Gu Nan's path of retreat. If Gu Nan wanted to escape by force, he would definitely retreat. This was not the first time Austin had seen Gu Nan forcefully open a dimensional passage while withstanding the holy sword's damage. However, the situation was different this time. Austin's expression changed slightly, and his hands did not stop moving as if he wanted to let Gu Nan escape. At this moment, a darkness that seemed to devour everything came down from above Gu Nan's head. There was no end to it, and there was nowhere to run. Dark Goddess Daisy. The scythe surrounded by death energy and the azure light that pierced through the sky attacked at the same time. Their target was Gu Nan's back. God of Death Bayer and Master of Azure Boswell. Gu Nan faced the combined attacks of 4 of the most powerful overgods in almost an instant, and there were still more overgods rushing over from behind. A moment ago, he had put Lorenza in a desperate situation. Now it was his turn. Come on. Gu Nan's eyes were cold. He withstood the holy sword's power with his back, and then punched the scythe and azure light, breaking them apart. The holy sword entered his body, and terrifying holy flames instantly ignited Gu Nan's body. The all-devouring darkness began to envelop his head, causing Gu Nan's consciousness to turn pitch black, and he completely lost consciousness. The Lady of Darkness was not much weaker than Austin, and in terms of the nature of her power, Gu Nan would have a harder time dealing with her. However, Gu Nan still did not care. Even though he had completely lost consciousness, he still followed the predetermined route. The route he had set was very special. It did not lead to either of the 2 major worlds, but to the world of Crack. The world of gods was the home of the gods, and to go to the world of heavens, he had to pass through the dimensional wall, which was likely to be stopped midway. The best place to go was undoubtedly the world of Crack. Charge! Charge! Amidst the boundless silence and darkness, Gu Nan still kept his consciousness and mind clear. In that instant, Gu Nan charged through the spatial passageway, and the combined might of the 4 overgods completely destroyed the space at the same time, leaving no traces behind. Chapter 521. Read. 1. Gu Nan disappeared again. He was just like those famous assassins in history, shining brilliantly in an assassination, and then no one could find any trace of him after that. Of course, it was a bit embarrassing for him to be an assassin as a path-fusing cultivator. But on the other hand, if the assassination target was a main god, it seemed to become a great achievement. The fall of a main god was always in a large-scale war of the same level, with at least 3 or 4 people of the same level besieging them. They had never seen one die at the hands of a single person. For example, there were several wars of the gods in the early years, and the siege of Lu Wen, Jiu Pe, and Gu Nan. But the Lord of Flowers, Lorenza, died at the hands of Gu Nan, and only Gu Nan made a move, and he succeeded in a very short time. The result of this battle caused a stir in both worlds. After all, it was related to the fall of a main god, and no one dared to take it lightly. On the other hand, the war between the 2 worlds had just begun, and the world of gods had already lost 2 main gods, which was a blow to the morale of the gods. Everyone understood that the war was essentially a war between main gods and path-fusing cultivators. No matter how many ordinary gods and star lords there were, they could not affect the upper echelons. But once the war broke out, whoever made the first move would be at a disadvantage. But what about the front line? 2 main gods had already died in the rear. What was the point of fighting? The dark cloud of defeat had begun to envelop the sky of the world of gods. Still haven't found him? Austin met with the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and their expressions were solemn. Until now, they had not found Gunan. Daisy shook her head gently. We have been looking for him since he disappeared that day. The bit wall has not fluctuated, so he has not returned to the heavens. If he is not hiding in the gap between the 2 worlds, he must still be hiding in some corner. Although she said there were 2 possibilities, Daisy was obviously more inclined to the latter. After all, the gap between the 2 worlds was too narrow. They had searched it before, but naturally they had found nothing. It had to be mentioned here that the location of the crack world was indeed very remote. It was so remote that if Gunan had not discovered Taoist Netherworld first, he might not have found the original realm even after a year and a half of searching. It wasn't that no one had explored the gap between the 2 realms, but since ancient times, only Taoist Netherworld had discovered the location of the original realm. This was not something that could be explained by luck. Austin agreed with Daisy's opinion as well. He had some understanding of Gunan's concealment skills. He believed that Gunan must be hiding in some corner of the Pantheon world, secretly licking his wounds, waiting for the moment when his wounds were completely healed before he would come out again to hunt down Lord. He felt that day was not far away. However, Austin might be disappointed because when Gunan's will awakened, he had already arrived at the world of the gaps, which was also the original realm that Luwen mentioned. The first thing that came into Gunan's eyes was a boundless starry sky, somewhat similar to the Milky Way in his memory. Gunan did not study astronomy in his previous life, nor could he tell where he was from the star map. However, after his will awakened, he successfully connected with his body. Just as he had expected, the combined attack of 4 top lords had seriously injured even the body of the evil god. Lorenza is still Lorenza. Gunan could not help but shake his head. He did not expect Lorenza to be so resolute. She did not care about her last chance of survival and wanted to drag him down with her. After all, the god of flowers, who was at the level of a lord, was an extremely rare situation even in the game. And the darkness from the Lady of Darkness had left countless negative statuses on his body, which greatly slowed down his self-healing process. Only after the power of these rules was expelled could his body return to normal. Therefore, Gunan was not in a hurry and simply waited here patiently. Thus, he discovered that there was a huge civilization on the star path not far from the will. A coincidence? Gunan raised his eyebrows slightly, but he immediately understood. He did not know how long his will had been floating in the sea of stars. This kind of floating was not irregular. On the contrary, it would be attracted by a large number of living beings. In fact, it had come to him on its own. However, if he could find a civilization even while floating freely like this, it could only mean one thing. He had probably been in the original realm for a long time. What a pity! Gunan could not help but shake his head gently. If he had been asleep for more than 100 years, perhaps the battle outside would have already ended, and most of the arrangements on the blue planet would have been in vain. 4 powerhouses at the path integration level, time was really not something that could be used. Their existence in the world was too huge, and the interference of their will with the rules was definitely not a joke. It was useless to think about this now. After his will awakened, his body would recover in a month at most. Gunan began to look at the huge civilization below. This civilization was indeed very powerful, to the extent that Gunan had never seen it before. According to the calculations of his previous life, this civilization spanned at least 3 galaxies, modified and controlled more than 60 administrative planets, and a large number of uninhabitable resource planets, all of which were constantly supplying resources to the civilization. There was definitely no such civilization in the heavens. There were not many starry planes to begin with, and it was even more impossible to have one of this size. Even in the Milky Way sky, a large number of people gathered in the center of the plane, and there would not be more than 20 administrative planets. More importantly, Gu-Nan felt a familiar aura inside the civilization. This familiarity did not come from acquaintances, but from the level. There were path integration cultivators of the same level here. Without much hesitation, Gu-Nan descended to the ground. Anyway, he was just a wisp of will. At most, he could use a part of the rules, so he was not afraid of being besieged. Just as Gu-Nan entered the civilized star region, 3 wills immediately rose from the center of the star region and quickly approached him. After a short while, 3 figures appeared in front of Gu-Nan. These 3 people were dressed somewhat similarly, all wearing long robes of Taoist robes. The old man in the middle wore a Taoist crown, and a strange dragonfish pattern was embroidered on his chest. He had a calm expression, and on either side of him was a man and a woman. The man's hair was disheveled, and there was a look of indifference on his face, as if he had no interest in Gu-Nan. The woman's Taoist robes were neat, and her hair was neatly tied behind her head. There was a sharp look in her eyes. 3 path integration cultivators. I'm old Taoist Xian He. Greetings, fellow cultivator. The old man performed a strange greeting. He did not speak, but directly transmitted his will to Gu-Nan. They had all rushed here because they sensed the aura of a sage. However, seeing as the other party was waiting calmly, he did not have any ill intentions. Chapter 522. Reading. After a short conversation, Gu-Nan understood the identities of the 3 people in front of him. They also confirmed that Gu-Nan had no ill intentions. The old Taoist priest, Xian He, was not a traditional Taoist priest. His real name was Xian He. On the other hand, the fierce-looking woman was a Taoist priest and called herself Taoist Blue One. The undisciplined young man was called Su Antiing, and he was an itinerant cultivator. On the capital planet, in a quiet and secluded courtyard, the interstellar civilization, Gu-Nan stood by the window and looked at the scenery outside as he muttered softly. This civilization, which the 3 sages called the interstellar civilization, had indeed reached an unimaginable level. The core of the interstellar civilization was a cultivation civilization. However, when a civilization developed to a certain level, a part of the technology tree would naturally be illuminated. However, like the heavenly worlds, most of it was metaphysical technology. Therefore, what entered Gu-Nan's eyes now was the strange scene of a group of people in long Taoist robes driving a hovering flying car. Taoist Gu-Nan, have you been here before? Xian He asked as he walked out from behind Gu-Nan with a faint smile. The 3 of them naturally did not believe Gu-Nan's claim that he was an interstellar wanderer. Given their realm, they could naturally see Gu-Nan's current state. This person was clearly just a will that had descended. Even his body had been condensed temporarily, so he definitely had his own foundation. However, there was actually a second civilization in the universe that possessed sage-level power. This was what Xian He and the others were interested in. This is my first time here. Gu-Nan replied calmly. Do sages like you usually leave the star field to explore? It was not difficult for Tao integration experts to directly project their will outside, and they would not be affected by the harsh environment of the starry sky. Of course we do. Xian He nodded and said, however, the vastness of the universe is unimaginable. It is too inefficient for us to search for extraterrestrial civilizations. Such matters are usually done by fleet. Xian He had expected Gu-Nan to ask this question since he had come from an extraterrestrial planet. As he conversed with Xian He, Gu Nan slowly learned about the current state of the interstellar civilizations. Due to the highly stable space laws of the original realm, even path integration practitioners could only teleport short distances within the original realm. Breaking the boundaries was impossible. Any barrier was stronger on the inside than on the outside. Gu Nan could barely squeeze in a bit of his will from the outside, and the people inside could only be trapped here. Is the original realm a cage? This thought flashed through Gu Nan's mind, but it quickly disappeared. There had never been a cage that would reflect information from the outside world and continuously transmit information to the outside world. After a short exchange, Gu Nan continued, "Do you guys know a person called Luwen? He should have been on the verge of becoming a sage." Xian He shook his head. "I've watched the stars get to where they are today. I've never heard of this person." Gu Nan thought for a moment and said, "The names might be different. He's a person who has mastered the dual laws of space and time." "You've seen my master?" Before Xian He could speak, Taoist Blue One's voice suddenly rang out, and he quickly appeared in front of Gu Nan. Only then did Gu Nan take a closer look at her. He realized that the style of her Taoist robe was indeed similar to Lu Wen's. Even though Xian He was the one who spoke to Gu Nan, Taoist Blue One and Su Antiang clearly did not relax their surveillance of this place. Gu Nan's gaze slowly fell on Taoist Blue One. He was not surprised. There would not be many super civilizations that had path integration practitioners. It was very likely that there was only one. The possibility that this place was related to Lu Wen was very high. Lu Wen was a figure from tens of thousands of years ago in the interstellar civilizations. His real name was no longer known, and only his Taoist name, Heavenly Spring, was left behind. In his previous life, Lu Wen did not have many friends, nor did he have an illustrious master. He was more like a lone cultivator, and he did not even have many personal disciples. Now, 10,000 years later, there was only Taoist Blue One. "You've really seen my master before?" Taoist Blue One stared closely at Gu Nan. "I've met him once." Gu Nan had an unfathomable look on his face. "You know, in the endless Milky Way, one can always meet all kinds of people." Taoist Blue One's expression was solemn as he said, "But he's already dead. He died during the tribulation to become a saint. Perhaps he was lucky enough to survive." "Impossible. Then why didn't he come back to take a look?" Taoist Blue One's emotions instantly became agitated. Gu Nan shook his head lightly, and did not continue on this topic. He turned to look at Xian He and the old Taoist. "Then do you know a person called Taoist Huang Quan? Perhaps Lu Wen's survival had something to do with him." Taoist Blue One shook his head to indicate that he did not know. "However," Xian He said, "when Heavenly Spring was undergoing his tribulation, there were some strange words." "What did he say?" "To become a saint is to trap oneself. The heavenly worlds." The time that Gu Nan had slept was actually not as long as he had imagined. It had only been a few years. During the time that Gu Nan had disappeared, the two realms had already engaged in a true battle. Many gods and astral lords had died on the battlefield, and even one fusing Daos had fallen. The one who had died was Qin Guanrua of the netherworld skies. This rather ambitious fusing Daos, who was not considered old, had finally caught the attention of the lords because he had frequently taken action in the great battle. In the end, Austin and Bayer had joined forces to first kill his main body on the battlefield. Then, with the help of the Nightmare Lord, they had once again sneaked into the netherworld skies. The fusing Daos of the heavenly worlds were actually even more inexperienced when faced with enemy attack. The lords had a great battle every 10,000 years or so, and it was not as if they had never fallen before. But what about the heavenly worlds? In the early years, there was a saying that the astral lords had fallen in a great battle, and their descendants had inherited the astral realm. However, such a thing had not happened in the past 10,000 years. Even battles between fusing Daos were rare. Therefore, if Qin Guanrua had been caught off guard and Austin and Bayer had chased him all the way to the netherworld skies, he would have fallen in the blink of an eye. There would not have been any time to rescue him. Finally, one of the fusing daos of the heavenly worlds had fallen. This greatly boosted the morale of the heavenly worlds, and the flames of war were ignited once again. The heavenly worlds, which had not been united to begin with, began to retreat under the attacks of the gods. Very soon, they had entered a situation where each side fought for itself. In the midst of the great battle, only Gu Nan's god nation was like a piece of pure land. No matter what happened outside, no one dared to come and throw away their lives. However, as the flames of war spread into the heavenly worlds, very few people obeyed the prohibitions of the lords, and gods constantly entered the god nation to attack. Fortunately, with Yan Xiaoxiao's current abilities, she was already able to temporarily mobilize the power of the god nation, so that it would not be destroyed. Until one day Gu Nan's figure suddenly appeared in the evil god's temple, and a deep and mysterious aura began to emerge throughout the entire god nation. Gu Nan slowly opened his eyes and saw that the god nation was in a complete mess. Chapter 523. Read. 1 Patries was a newly ascended god, and his divine occupation was cold. This was a very common divine occupation. There were at least a dozen elemental gods in the world of gods, and there were quite a few fire gods as well. However, there had never been a main god, and the divine occupation was one of the 4 great fundamental origins, so everyone had a chance. Patries was an ambitious god. He was quite active in the war, but he was also very careful to protect himself. He had survived until now with a mere level 6 power. The secret to his ability to do this was to try his best not to fight against truly strong enemies. He focused his energy on causing destruction and never stayed on the main battlefield for too long. After a few rounds of such operations, he realized that it suited him very well. Cold was essentially a derivative of the divine occupation of water. Patries had the ability to hide himself in water, and which astral plane did not have water? Water became the best hiding place for Patries, and the heavenly worlds were not self-created astral planes, so there were too many flaws in the eyes of the gods. Patries almost effortlessly assassinated the powerhouses of these astral planes one by one, rapidly weakening the power of these astral lords so that they could be defeated one by one. As the operations became more successful, Patries' ambition grew. He was already quite famous among the gods, but he was not satisfied with just that. He wanted to be the most eye-catching person in this war. What could make one more famous than invading the astral plane of a path converger? Gu Nan's disappearance was no secret. Most people were inclined to believe that he was trapped in the world of gods to heal, so his astral plane must be the most empty. However, Patries now regretted it. What is this? Patries looked ahead in disbelief. In his line of sight, there was a cloud of black fog rapidly covering the entire astral plane. This vigilant god did not hesitate. He immediately retreated from the astral plane, and only then did he look down with lingering fear. Just as he expected, as long as the black shadow swept through the area, all the invaders would be dragged into it, and there would be no more sounds to be heard. What frightened Patries even more was that the black fog's devouring targets were extremely precise. There was not a single mistake, and not a single one was missed. This meant that the black fog's control over this astral plane had reached an unimaginable level. It must be the evil god's return. No. Before Patries could finish his thoughts, a shadow had already appeared behind him and swallowed him whole. Gu Nan slowly opened his eyes in the evil god's temple. After dealing with the little bugs that had snuck into his divine kingdom, his sin value had increased slightly, which meant that there were a few gods among them. Of course, it wasn't entirely Gu Nan's own ability to be able to achieve absolute accuracy. It was more because he borrowed Yan Xiaoxiao's control over the god kingdom. Only the spirit of the divine kingdom could be as familiar with every corner of the divine kingdom as it was with its own body. Teacher, next time before you disappear, can you tell me first? Yan Xiaoxiao's helpless voice sounded. It was obvious that she had spent a lot of effort dealing with the attacks during this period of time. Gu Nan smiled and said, "There won't be a next time." Yan Xiaoxiao was slightly stunned, but Gu Nan had no intention of saying anything more. His gaze paused on the divine kingdom for a moment before he quickly retracted it. He had already recovered to his peak condition. The sin value from Van Leeuwen and Lorenza had also allowed him to step into the ranks of the 13th level. Even if he had to face the attacks of the four main gods again, Gu Nan was confident that he could escape unscathed. If it was a one-on-one battle, Gu Nan wouldn't be able to suppress Austin by himself, but he wouldn't have anything to fear, because Austin wouldn't be able to kill him alone. From the second-class advancement until now, Gu Nan had spent more than 10 years, and he could finally say that he was invincible. What he needed to do next was to kill all those who needed to be killed. As the other side of the divine kingdom, Yan Xiaoxiao seemed to sense what Gu Nan was thinking. She said in a low voice, "Teacher, are we going to start a massacre?" "More or less." Gu Nan nodded and said, "Jiu Po is right about one thing. Only by completely controlling this world will it be easier to investigate some things." Gu Nan had completely stabilized his realm of the 13th level. His power had reached a whole new level, but he wasn't in a hurry to plunder the sin value. Instead, he went to another place. Jiopa Heaven. "You mean, Leeuwen already knew that there was a world outside the original realm?" Jiopa revealed a thoughtful expression after listening to Gu Nan's narration. Gu Nan didn't tell him the source of the information, nor would he reveal that he had entered and exited the crack worlds. He only told him what Leeuwen had said before his tribulation. "I suspect that Huang Quan told him." Gu Nan said calmly. Huang Quan likely discovered the original realm long ago, and even communicated with Leeuwen in his previous life. Jiopa nodded with a solemn expression. He understood Gu Nan's meaning. Right now, only the four of them could confirm that they were from the original realm. If Leeuwen and Huang Quan had colluded long ago, then it was their turn to be careful. "We have to speed up the plan." Jiopa understood the situation. Leeuwen had already regained the power he had in his previous life. They had to act as soon as possible. Right now, his and Gu Nan's only advantage was that they were above the other two in terms of power. They had to make use of this time to completely pacify the two worlds. "We have to make them engage in an all-out war," Gu Nan said calmly. Although the Great War was going on, the only master gods and convergence practitioners who had truly died in the war was Qin Guanruo. Jiopo's gaze turned to Gu Nan. "Not everyone is willing to use their full strength. How do you plan to make them do it?" Gu Nan smiled. "If they are not willing to use their full strength, then we'll go to their house to fight." "This is a vicious plan." Jiopa couldn't help but be amused. "Who are you going to find first? Dream Immortal? Si Yun? Dream Immortal of the Cloud Dream Heaven and Si Yun of the Milky Way Heaven were both convergence practitioners who had not put much effort into the Great War. They had only shown their faces once or twice. However, Gu Nan didn't think much of these two small characters. He directly said, "Zhaoren Wang." The world of gods. A god nation stood high above the clouds. Holy light and a holy aura were everywhere inside, preventing anyone from having any thoughts of blasphemy. This was the god nation that belonged to the King of Gods, the god nation of the Lord of Light and Justice. It was the last pure land in the world. If one day the world was engulfed by evil, then this place would fight to the last living creature, shed their last drop of blood, and swear to kill evil. And so, evil came today. Gu Nan's figure suddenly appeared in the god nation of light. A heavy sword slashed into Austin's main god palace. A holy light boundary appeared instantly. Although it could not resist Gu Nan's monstrous power, it purified all the shadows he used to form the sword. Not even a speck was left. Chapter 524. Reading. 1. You're very bold. Austin's voice sounded from behind Gu Nan. He had already appeared and was looking at Gu Nan coldly. Apart from the few who had surrendered, all the enemies who had dared to step into his divine kingdom had closed their eyes forever. Gu Nan turned around and only smiled at him. His smile was clearly filled with one word: arrogance. Austin could tell that the evil god's realm had increased once again. It was so fast that he had to be vigilant. Evidently, this was the reason for his arrogance. But did he think this was enough? The holy sword suddenly fell. In the Holy Light Kingdom, the power of this sword reached a terrifying level. Gu Nan, who had long been able to resist the holy sword outside, was now at the 13th rank, but he was still turned into ashes by this sword. Only a shadow under his feet was still moving. Austin did not stop at all. Holy flames instantly swept over, and the shadow on the ground disappeared without a trace. However, Gu Nan's aura did not dissipate. Loud laughter could be heard in the air. Gu Nan's figure appeared once again and then disappeared quickly. He had long been prepared to escape. The previous one was just a clone. You can't escape. Austin's voice was still cold and calm, but there was a hint of certainty in it. He could easily leave a mark on those who dared to enter the Holy Light Kingdom, and the Holy Light would guide them. Tracking methods were never rare, especially in the hands of someone at Austin's level. Long before he appeared, he had already left a mark on Gu Nan's body with the help of the omnipresent Holy Light in the Divine Kingdom. Although it was a hasty move, the mark could stay for at least a few days, which was enough for him to track Gu Nan. Although he did not know why Gu Nan had appeared in the Holy Light Kingdom, Austin had no reason not to seize the opportunity since it was right in front of him. His figure flickered, and he appeared at the Darkness God System's side. I left a mark on the evil god. Cover me when I enter the heavens, Austin said to the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. Daisy was slightly stunned, as if surprised by the evil god's reappearance. She nodded and said, All right. Moments after Austin and Daisy came to an agreement, the four peak overgods appeared in the two-realm battlefield and charged toward the heavenly world. After hearing about the whereabouts of the evil god, Bayer and Boswell didn't hesitate and immediately participated in this operation. All of the Tao integration stage cultivators were given a fright upon seeing this. The four strongest main gods had all appeared. This meant that they had completely given up on defense. Was this the final battle? Yu Lian and Jiu Po appeared immediately, along with Zhao Renwang. The Star Lords of the three primeval star realms represented the highest combat power in the heavenly planes. Zhao Renwang rarely fights, but now he had no choice but to show himself. Very soon, he was glad that he had made it in time. That was because Austin was rushing towards the Divine Emperor Heaven under the cover of the other three. The three who were being held back by Daisy and the others were startled. Zhao Renwang immediately abandoned his opponent, Bayer, and turned towards Divine Emperor Heaven. At this time, no one accused him of being selfish. A Star Lord could use at least 120% of his power in his own star realm. Instead, Yu Lian and Jiu Po were doing their best to help him stall for time. Zhao Renwang moved extremely quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had already appeared in front of Austin. The ancient bronze sword that appeared in the sky landed heavily on Austin's head. The human sovereign's sword that had been passed down since ancient times was up against the holy sword of the King of Gods. If this was any other time, perhaps Austin would have the intention to fight him. However, he was in a hurry to track down the evil god. How could he be in the mood? Austin blocked the human sovereign's sword with his holy sword. Then, he pushed with his left hand. The golden scale appeared again and landed directly on Zhao Renwang's head. Austin, who had two peak godhoods, rarely used impartial. However, it could often produce shocking results at critical moments. Zhao Renwang had fought Austin before, so he wasn't afraid of this light core god. Even though his own realm was only around the 13th rank, the human sovereign's special nomological laws allowed him to fight against Austin. However, he had never seen Austin use impartial before. When the scale landed, Zhao Renwang instinctively slashed with his sword. Then, he discovered that the human sovereign's sword was actually suppressed by the golden scale. On the other side was Austin's holy sword. He had actually used his holy sword as the price to temporarily trap Zhao Renwang. The next moment, Gu Nan's figure appeared first. He was right behind Austin and fiercely punched him. Of course, Gu Nan wouldn't foolishly wait for the other party to find him. Instead, he took the initiative and pretended to be here to help. Austin knew that the evil god was here, so he was naturally prepared. A ball of holy flame exploded from his right hand. A terrifying shockwave crashed into Gu Nan's body. Austin was a core god who had risen from the War of Gods. His battle awareness was extremely high. He immediately found a way to deal with Gu Nan. Pure nomological laws would be directly blasted away by Gu Nan's immense strength. Instead, he would first convert the nomological laws into physical power, which would at least provide some resistance. However, Gu Nan's body of the evil god had been strengthened, and the power of his punch had reached an unimaginable level. The holy flame was instantly shattered, but he himself was sent flying by the shockwave. Austin followed him like a shadow. He immediately withdrew his holy sword and slashed it directly at Gu Nan's body. At the same time, the golden scale also pressed down on Gu Nan's head. Gu Nan didn't have any intention of staying. He used the evil god's body to forcefully block Austin's sword. However, he also took the opportunity to escape the suppression of the golden scale. His figure instantly disappeared. Gu Nan wasn't one of those Dao integration stage cultivators. He was all too clear about the power of the golden scale in Austin's hands. He had to escape from it. And with this delay, Yu Lian, Jiu Po, and the other Dao integration stage cultivators all arrived. The scene was a little chaotic. Bayer stood beside the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and narrowed his eyes. "Let's stay here. Austin left a mark on that evil god, so he won't be able to escape." Daisy and King Dark Azure both nodded. With their strength, they weren't afraid of being surrounded by Dao integration stage cultivators. There was always a chance for them to escape. However, none of them expected that Austin would reappear in such a short time. "He's escaped." Austin only used 2 words to express what he meant. "Where did he go?" King Dark Azure Boswell couldn't help but ask. He knew that there was no way Gu Nan could escape from Austin's surveillance. "The front lines," Austin replied in an indifferent voice. The other 3 instantly turned around. Sure enough, Gu Nan was already standing behind Beast God, who was hurriedly taking cover. At this moment, they suddenly understood what Gu Nan was trying to do. He was clearly using himself as bait to start a war between main gods, and he had succeeded. Chapter 525. Read. 1. Gu Nan appeared on the front lines. His first target was Beast God Bridges. Austin and the other 3 were in the heavenly realms and couldn't come to his rescue in time. Others had to help him. A faint purple mist enveloped him, and the Netherworld River flowed behind Gu Nan. Above him, violent storms and thunder intertwined. In front of him was the image of a sinister-looking demon. The moment Gu Nan appeared, the beast god retreated rapidly. Behind him, 4 chief gods attacked at the same time to stop Gu Nan. Master of Nightmares Kos, Master of the Netherworld River Ogiest, Storm Chief God Raymond, and Demon King Stanley. They were the remaining 4 chief gods of the Darkness God system. Faced with the sudden arrival of Gu Nan, these 4 chief gods attacked at the same time. The Dao integration practitioners of the heavenly realms definitely weren't this united. For example, Austin had already wreaked havoc in the Divine Emperor Heaven. Excluding Yu Lian and the other 2, only 2 or 3 Dao integration practitioners had appeared. However, this wasn't important because Gu Nan, who was already at level 13, didn't care how many people stood against him. No matter how many nomological laws you gathered, it would all be a single punch. With a single punch, the storm shattered, the dream collapsed, the netherworld river flowed backward, and the demons retreated. Only then did the beast god's divine body shatter with a look of disbelief. The battlefield instantly fell silent. Li Si, who was originally fighting the beast god, looked at Gu Nan with a strange look in his eyes. Breaking the combined nomological laws, attack of 4 chief gods with a single punch, and then directly shattering the beast god's divine body. Li Si suddenly felt that perhaps the gods were right. This person's growth rate wasn't normal at all. If he was allowed to continue developing, perhaps no one would be able to stop him anymore. Death God Bayer was the first to arrive. He had always had a good personal relationship with the beast god. A cold glint flashed across his eyes. Chief gods relied on godhood to gather nomological laws. Although they wouldn't die on the spot when their divine bodies were destroyed, they would suffer greater losses than Tao integration practitioners. They definitely couldn't ignore it. The death god's scythe suddenly descended, but Gu Nan calmly raised his head. There was still the aura of level 4 laws left on his body. His head twisted unnaturally before he punched the cold scythe. The power of Bayer's all-out attack couldn't be underestimated. This saber strike directly chopped off half of Gu Nan's shoulder, revealing the sinister white bones within. But the wound was healing at a terrifying speed. Gu Nan smashed the scythe with a punch and then shook his right hand. The injury caused by the scythe had already healed. He flashed a cold smile at Bayer, and his figure suddenly disappeared. His target had already become the Grim Reaper. Austin and the other 2 had also arrived. If the evil god wasn't in the heavenly worlds, they wouldn't be so foolish as to fight on someone else's home ground. That would be equivalent to seeking their own death. Bayer had already become Gu Nan's target. Thus, the 3-star masters of the 3 original realms also found their own opponent. Zhao Renwang was slightly weaker, so he didn't let his anger get to his head. He stared at Boswell while Jiu Po went to look for Austin to continue the unfinished battle from last time. Back when they were hunting Van Leeuwen, Jiu Po had fought with Austin for a short while. At that time, he had underestimated justice and almost allowed Austin to get rid of him. It was Gu Nan who made up for the last step. This time, Jiu Po obviously wouldn't make such a mistake again. Yulian's opponent was the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. This was also the only battle between the old and the new. Daisy was actually much older than Austin. She had even met Yulian's teacher before, but Yulian had only inherited the Grottovoid heaven in this generation. Apart from these 3 groups, all the main gods of the world of gods had already joined the battle. The 4 main gods of the darkness divine system who had attacked earlier appeared together. The goddess of nature, Daphne, and the lord of war, Eugene, arrived together. Even the beast god, whose divine body had been destroyed once, walked onto the battlefield with a gloomy expression. At this time, the Tao convergence practitioners of the world of gods naturally wouldn't hold back anymore. The battle between the 2 worlds had already reached the most critical stage. At this time, the battle between the main gods and those below the Tao convergence level had actually stopped. This was because everyone knew that the final outcome of the war would be decided by this battle in the gap between the 2 worlds. Everyone had found their opponent, but there was one person who wasn't so well behaved, and that was Gu Nan. Gu Nan smashed his fist toward Bayer. The latter was already prepared, and his body was in a state of half-life and half-death. However, Gu Nan's fist smashed into thin air. Bayer swung his scythe in a reverse grip, and a dense aura of death surged out from the realm of the dead, wanting to drag Gu Nan away from the world of the living. Gu Nan grinned, and his body instantly disappeared into the shadows. His scythe similarly missed. In this round of exchange, neither side had gained the upper hand. Bayer wasn't anxious either. As long as Gu Nan appeared from the shadows, it would be impossible for him to escape his targeting. He knew that Gu Nan's regenerative abilities were extremely powerful, but as the death god, he had a law that he could deal with. As long as enough aura of death accumulated in Gu Nan's body, the final detonation would definitely cause massive damage. The next moment, Gu Nan's figure suddenly appeared on the other side, and he ruthlessly smashed his fist toward someone. Beast God Bridges. Bridges was practically about to spit out a mouthful of blood. Why was this lunatic looking for him again? This time, no one could help him stall for time. All the main gods had their own opponents to deal with. Only Bayer was unoccupied, but when his scythe slashed down, Gu Nan didn't even spare him a glance. The scene of a divine body exploding appeared again, and the pitiful beast god was blasted into smithereens once again. The price was that Gu Nan had been hit by the scythe again. Moreover, Bayer's reaction was extremely fast. When he swung his scythe, he was also attacking Bridges' enemy. This time, it was Gu Nan's acquaintance, Mu Qishuang of Blue Sky Heaven. Mu Qishuang wasn't weak, but her laws were rather restrained by the death god, so she was barely able to withstand the scythe. Bayer originally only had the idea of cutting his losses, but he didn't expect to have some unexpected gains. Hence, he immediately threw aside Gu Nan, who was even more slippery than a loach, and focused on dealing with Mu Qishuang. In Bayer's opinion, if he allowed Mu Qishuang to go against him, it probably wouldn't take long for her laws to be sliced into smithereens. Hence, Gu Nan had to help. His thinking was basically correct, but would Gu Nan care about Mu Qishuang's life? With a flash, Gu Nan had already appeared where Daphne and Zhou Jiming were. Hence, Daphne was also blasted down by Gu Nan's 3 consecutive punches without anyone's help. The vigilant Daphne dodged 2 punches, but there was no such thing as staying on guard for long. She was still blasted into smithereens by Gu Nan. Damn it! Bayer's eyes were filled with boundless killing intent, but his mind was extremely clear. He knew that it would be very difficult to capture Gu Nan, who was shrouded in shadows, but he didn't expect him to completely disregard the lives of his comrades. Since that was the case, Bayer forced Mu Qishuang away with a single slash. He ignored the other Dao integration stage powerhouses and headed straight for the battlefield of the 3 strongest powerhouses. Chapter 526. Read. Bayer was very clear-headed. He knew that if he followed behind Gu Nan, he would at most eat some of the dust. In the end, the entire battle would be dragged down by his tactic. Although this kind of tactic made him very angry, this was a battle to the death. Who cared about morality? Thus, Bayer made the best choice. Since Gu Nan liked to deal with ordinary chief gods, then he would force Zhao Renwang to retreat. If Boswell could also free up his hands, even if he had to compete with Gu Nan in speed, his side would definitely have the advantage. Lord of Fangqing immediately understood Bayer's meaning. He pointed his staff into the distance, and the sky full of green light became even denser. Even Zhao Renwang's human Dao King energy was suppressed. The Grim Reaper scythe attacked from behind. Zhao Renwang's mouth twitched. But he couldn't bring himself to ask Gu Nan for help, so he could only try his best to hold on. But he was the weakest among the top 7. Now that he was being attacked by the 2, how long could he last? With the tacit cooperation of Lord of Fangqing and the Grim Reaper, Zhao Renwang was hit by the Grim Reaper scythe 4 times. Bayer directly detonated the death aura in his body, and his body instantly exploded. The damage caused by the Grim Reaper was not comparable to the damage caused by Gu Nan's body. The death aura directly attacked Zhao Renwang's nomological laws, which could be considered to have injured his foundation. It could be said that Zhao Renwang would not be able to fight again in a short period of time. Taking advantage of the time that Bayer and Boswell were dealing with Zhao Renwang, Gu Nan continuously attacked the other main gods. His movements were extremely fast. Without the support of a top chief god, ordinary chief gods could not resist Gu Nan's attacks at all. They were directly wiped out. The other 5 chief gods of the darkness god system were all injured. The most unlucky one, the beast god, had his divine body destroyed for the 3rd time. Nature goddess Daphne had also been destroyed twice. Even if the destruction of the divine body was slightly better than being attacked by the nomological laws, it also meant a large loss of godhood. It was impossible to ignore it. Bayer and Lord of Fongqing exchanged a glance. They were very clear that with the characteristics of their nomological laws, it would not be easy to catch Gu Nan. Since the other party wanted to exchange a life for a life, then so be it. Without any communication, the two of them pounced on a Dao integration cultivator next to them. It was Song Fei, who looked relatively weaker. Song Fei's nomological laws were useless in battle, and his cultivation base was not high either. Naturally, he was a pushover among the Dao integration cultivators. However, because of Gu Nan's decisiveness, he was besieged. This was the most painful thing. Since when had Gu Nan become so important? Song Fei was barely hanging on, and in the blink of an eye, he was killed by the two of them. His true spirit quickly returned to Shi Daotian, and he did not even have time to retract his laws. It wasn't that Song Fei didn't want to give it his all, but the combined might of 2 rank 14 overgods was not to be underestimated. When Bayer and Boswell joined hands, their efficiency in defeating the Dao-fusing cultivators was no lower than that of Gu Nan. In fact, the damage they could inflict was even greater. The beast god could appear again and again, but Song Fei did not dare to show himself again. Otherwise, he would really be in danger of dying. Bayer and Boswell found Dream immortal. She had yet to recover from the injuries inflicted by Gu Nan, so she was a good target. Gu Nan also found the Lord of Nightmares, who had just returned. Austin and Daisy had Jiupo and Yulian to deal with, while Gu Nan and Bayer started a hunting competition. This was exactly what Gu Nan wanted. Speaking of which, there was nothing he could do. After all, no one could capture Gu Nan. If they did not start a hunting competition with him, could they just watch as Gu Nan slaughtered overgods? On the other side, Yulian could already feel the pressure from the old senior. She did not even have the chance to throw out most of her Dao techniques before they were directly swallowed by the boundless darkness. If not for some secret techniques from the Grotto Void Heaven, perhaps she would have already been defeated and would not have been able to fight back. Jiupo and Austin were evenly matched, and neither could suppress the other in a short period of time. Jiupo was already on guard against justice, so he would not be easily defeated by Austin. With his strength, it was not a problem for him to stall the battle for now. Your people can't last much longer. Are you still not going to retreat? Jiupo smiled and pointed in a direction. In the direction he pointed, Daphne was once again targeted by Gu Nan. Her power was starting to weaken, and she could not resist at all. Soon, Gu Nan shattered her divine spark. If not for the war between the two worlds, she would have long hidden in the divine kingdom. Why would she come to die again and again? Austin's expression was cold. Aren't you the same? It's not the same. Jiupo shook his head and said seriously, Gu Nan will kill people. There was a new change in the battle. After Gu Nan killed Daphne again, he quickly left the battlefield and had no intention of appearing again. Bayer and Master of Dark Azure looked at each other and immediately returned to the world of gods. When they arrived at the divine kingdom of nature, they saw that Gu Nan was already there. His divine body is strong, but it is also a drawback, Bayer said in a low voice. As long as we completely destroy him, he will not have the chance to interfere in this battle. In this battle, the two worlds would definitely have a winner. As long as they completely conquered the heavenly worlds, they would have time to deal with Gu Nan. Boswell said in a low voice, I will protect Daphne, you find an opportunity. Death nodded solemnly. If Gu Nan wanted to kill, he would not flee. They all knew that this was the best opportunity. However, Bayer soon realized that he did not need to deliberately find an opportunity, because Gu Nan did not even think about hiding his actions. He stood openly in the divine kingdom of nature, and the law of shadows rapidly radiated outwards, engulfing all the living beings in the divine kingdom. Boswell once again raised his staff high, and the light of dark azure fell upon the divine kingdom of nature, rapidly protecting a portion of the living beings and constantly resisting Gu Nan's law of shadows. In a pure confrontation of laws, Gu Nan was not stronger than master of dark azure. Gu Nan also understood this, so his figure flickered and appeared behind Boswell, and he suddenly smashed his fist down. Bayer, however, seemed to have long since anticipated this. He appeared in front of Gu Nan in advance, and the death scythe blocked his path. A scene similar to the one before occurred. The scythe left a serious injury on Gu Nan's body, but Gu Nan's fist also smashed the scythe into pieces. However, with this delay, Master of Dark Azure was naturally able to retreat calmly. None of the lords would be negligent in battle. Gu Nan just smiled. His figure rapidly flipped, and he punched out from all directions, all of them targeting Master of Dark Azure. Bayer was like the most astute hunter. No matter which angle Gu Nan attacked from, he could accurately block him. One more strike. Bayer estimated the strength of his opponent's divine body. As long as he was hit by the scythe again, the eruption of the aura of death would be enough to completely destroy his opponent. The shadow appeared again, and Bayer did not hesitate to strike heavily at Gu Nan. That's enough. Bayer's spirit was roused, and he immediately detonated the aura of death in Gu Nan's body. However, Gu Nan's subsequent actions startled him. It was as if Gu Nan knew what he was going to do, and he flew in front of Boswell. Chapter 527. Read. Never in his wildest dreams would Boswell have imagined that Gu Nan would use such a method to perish together with him. The aura of death had directly detonated within Gu Nan's body. Although Gu Nan was the first target, when he was close to the pale Azure Lord, the latter naturally could not escape. Almost at the same time the aura of death erupted, Boswell felt a terrifying shock wave attack him. The power of the laws also erupted in an instant. With Bayer's level, his attacks were naturally at the law level. His original intention was to kill Gu Nan with this. At the very least, he wanted to completely destroy Gu Nan's body and laws, so that he could no longer participate in this battle. But now Boswell had also become the target of this attack. He similarly could not withstand such a terrifying attack. The laws in his body collapsed almost instantly, and his divine body also fell apart. This was not because the pale Azure Lord was too weak, but because the aura of death accumulated in Gu Nan's body was simply too much. It could be said that ever since Bayer became a lord, there had never been anyone who could withstand so many of his scythes and accumulate such a large amount of aura of death. Ordinary people, even if they were a lord, would have long been chopped into pieces after receiving so many scythes of death. But it was also because of Gu Nan that Bayer was able to accumulate such a terrifying aura of death. When it erupted, even Boswell found it hard to resist. Bayer realized that he had been used by Gu Nan, but his combat awareness was also quite astonishing. He rapidly restrained all his emotions and rushed toward the center of the aura of death. He did not believe that Gu Nan would take the initiative to commit suicide. There was definitely another reason for him to do so. However, when Bayer arrived at the center of the aura of death, he discovered that things were not that simple. Just like Boswell, Gu Nan was blown into pieces by the aura of death. However, his flesh and blood were not completely corroded by the aura of death. Instead, they were rapidly mending together. After reaching the 13th rank, the strength of the heretic god's body had already exceeded the understanding of ordinary people. Just a drop of blood was enough to revive Gu Nan. Bayer's eyes narrowed. He rapidly manipulated the aura of death and used all his strength to corrode Gu Nan's flesh and blood. Unfortunately, Gu Nan was far more tenacious than he had imagined. The flesh and blood that were drifting around condensed in every detail, giving Bayer no time to make a move. This was different from the previous 2 times Gu Nan was surrounded. First, he was already at rank 13, and second, there was no Daisy to interfere this time, so there was no top-notch law of darkness to suppress his recovery. In the blink of an eye, Gu Nan's body was regenerating everywhere. To Bayer's left, he saw a Gu Nan with half of his head restored. To his right, he saw Gu Nan with a reconstructed arm. Every part of Gu Nan's body was as strong as a normal body. He didn't know which part to kill. Just a moment later, a complete Gu Nan reappeared, and the destroyed Law of Shadows also gathered again. Gu Nan even nodded at Bayer as a sign of respect, revealing a friendly smile. If it weren't for this person's help, he wouldn't have been able to deal with Lord Ashen so easily. The next moment, Gu Nan's figure disappeared again. The Law of Shadows once again enveloped the entire Nature Divine Kingdom, and the entire Gu Nan fell under his control. Bayer tried to use the Aura of Death to fight against the shadows, but what followed was Gu Nan's punch. A moment later, when Boswell barely managed to reform his divine body and arrived at the Nature Divine Kingdom with his damaged laws, he could only see Bayer standing there with an ashen expression. Lord Ashen sighed in his heart. He knew that their efforts were ultimately unable to stop the evil god's actions. Daphne, dead, Bayer said with a sullen expression. Bayer had watched helplessly as a main god died in front of him. This was the first time he had felt this powerless feeling of having a body full of laws and power but nowhere to release them. He had never seen an opponent like Gu Nan. It was as if Gu Nan was incomparably familiar with all his methods and had completely seen through his tactics. This was an extremely inconceivable thing. A main god's laws could be used in countless ways, many of which even they themselves weren't aware of. They were completely used according to the circumstances of the battle. However, Leyland could even predict these methods in advance. This was no longer something that could be explained by experience. Bayer even suspected that this evil god had some sort of short-term foresight ability, which was why he was able to do such unimaginable things. But no matter what, Daphne still died in the hands of Gu Nan. At this point, the light god system only had 3 main gods left. Other than Austin and Boswell, there was only the Lord of War Eugene. Meanwhile, Gu Nan had already drifted far away. 3 main gods, Van Leeuwen, Lorenza, and Daphne, had already died in his hands. His sin value had increased by a large margin. Originally, after killing 2 rank 11 main gods, he actually had some surplus in his sin value, which had exceeded the boundary of rank 13. But now there was Daphne, who was at rank 12. His sin value had exceeded Van Leeuwen and Lorenza by a little, but there was still a considerable distance to reach rank 14. There's still quite a gap. Gu Nan looked at the increase in his sin value. The gap was still rather large. More importantly, the sin value that the main gods could provide was a number that fluctuated according to their levels. The fluctuation could be very large, and it was difficult to accurately estimate. Even if he calculated the maximum value, he had to at least get rid of the remaining 5 main gods of the Darkness God system to have any hope of reaching rank 14. After coming to this conclusion, Gu Nan could only shake his head lightly and speed up to the next god nation. That was the Beast God Bridges God nation. In the gap between the 2 realms, Giopa saw Austin's movements suddenly stop, and she could not help but smile. Seems like it has already begun. Gu Nan had the ability to hunt down main gods alone, and he was extremely efficient. He would not leave any space for his target to escape. This was his strongest point. Moreover, his super recovery ability and the Law of Shadows ensured that very few people could stop Gu Nan. When he attacked those who were weaker than him, no one could protect the latter. Of course, Austin knew that Gu Nan had already killed Daphne and set off for the Beast God's God nation. Meanwhile, Boswell had suffered serious injuries because of Gu Nan's trap. "Let Bayer and the others come back," Austin suddenly said to Daisy. At the same time, he raised the golden scale and sent it to another battlefield. This time, the golden scale's target was Yulian, who was struggling to fight the Lady of Darkness. Daisy's expression turned cold, but her movements were not slow at all. The darkness that could devour everything instantly enveloped her. Austin's timing was very tricky. Yulian had to deal with Daisy's suppression, and she was already mentally and physically exhausted. She was instantly caught off guard. The golden scale landed on top of Yulian's head. This time, the scale was not used to control Yulian's power. Instead, it brought over a part of the darkness, and on the other side of the scale, there was already a ball of holy light shining. The combination of Austin and Daisy, the combination of light and darkness, an almost impossible and inconceivable combination, was achieved by Austin with fairness. Chapter 528. Read. A terrifying shockwave erupted from the gap between the two realms. Even Jiupo was affected by the collision of light and darkness. As the first target, Yulian was destroyed almost instantly. If Bayer were here, he would definitely have the feeling of, "I've seen this episode before," because just now, Boswell had suffered a similar fate. Boswell's divine body was blown up by Gu Nan's large amount of deathly aura. Yulian was also destroyed by the power of light and darkness. Yulian's injuries were not light either. She was not much worse off than Boswell. Jiupo was also affected. His figure instantly disappeared into the void, and when he came back, Austin and Daisy had both disappeared. Jiupo frowned. He quickly scanned the area with his divine soul to find the two lords. Then, he discovered a shocking fact. Austin and Daisy had taken Bayer with them. The three of them had charged into Zhao Renwang's divine Emperor Heaven. Did they not care about their nest? Jiupo was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood their plan. They wanted to compete with Gu Nan in terms of speed. They wanted to exchange the lives of lords and Dao integration cultivators. Those who could become top lords would not lose to anyone else when it came to ruthlessness towards their own people. Divine Emperor Heaven. Zhao Renwang was probably the most annoyed person now. For the sake of the overall situation, for the sake of tactics, sacrificing some individuals was a very normal thing, but when the person to be sacrificed was themselves, it was not something that anyone could accept. Moreover, he had no choice. It was the enemy who had chosen him. Even Jiupo would find it difficult to resist the joint attack of Austin, Daisy, and Bayer, let alone Zhao Renwang. Moreover, he had just been injured. In fact, if he was not in his astral boundary, he might not even have lasted the first round. He would have been killed by the three. Jiupo quickly returned to Divine Emperor Heaven to help Zhao Renwang stabilize the situation. If the three lords killed all the people of Divine Emperor Heaven, even Jiupo would not be able to save him. However, Zhao Renwang was having a hard time holding on. A large number of people in Divine Emperor Heaven were dying. Jiupo could not protect him. On the other hand, Austin and the other two were unstoppable. "Where's Yulian?" Zhao Renwang had already seen Jiupo. He questioned her loudly. Jiupo said solemnly, "Yulian was attacked by Austin and Daisy. Her injuries are probably worse than yours." Zhao Renwang opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew very well that if even Yulian was injured like this, it would be very difficult for her to help him. After all, it was impossible for her to have the home advantage. If she came to the Divine Emperor Heaven to help, the three of them might immediately change their target and kill Yulian first. It had to be said that Austin's choice was very smart. The tactics he used seemed to be the same as Gu Nan's, but Gu Nan relied on the fact that he was hard to kill, and even harder to capture, so he slowly nibbled away at the various sovereigns. However, when Austin and the other two joined forces, no one could contend against them in terms of absolute strength. In terms of destructive power, they were far stronger than Gu Nan. And at this critical moment, destructive power meant efficiency, and efficiency decided the outcome of the battle. On the other hand, Austin and the other two's super strength meant that they could directly go to the Divine Emperor Heaven, but Gu Nan could not go to the Tsang Qing Divine Kingdom. With his level 13 nomological laws, if he wanted to destroy the Tsang Qing Divine Kingdom, Boswell did not even need to show himself. He could just use the nomological laws to resist him. Even if the master of Tsang Qing was only injured, he could still delay Gu Nan for a long time. After all, that was his home ground. At the beginning of the war between the two worlds, the Pantheon world seemed to be at a disadvantage because two of their sovereigns had died first. However, their top-notch combat power was stronger than that of the celestial world. Now was the time to cut their losses, and they could make full use of this advantage. If both sides exchanged non-top-notch combat power, the final victor would undoubtedly be the Pantheon world. Austin's eyes were cold. His control of the nomological laws was extremely precise. He was like a war machine, purifying all the evil in the world. Zhao Renwang could only grit his teeth. He knew that all the Dao-fusing experts were being held back. Yu Lian and Gu Nan, who had the right to interfere in their battle, were already in trouble, and the other was in no mood to care about them. However, at this moment, an unexpected savior appeared. The sky above the Divine Emperor Heaven was suddenly covered by two huge shadows. Upon closer inspection, it was actually two giant dragons that traversed the horizon. Austin frowned and raised his head. However, he felt as if he was in a strange space. His control over his godhood and nomological laws had been weakened to an extremely low level. In this space, distance was pulled apart, time was compressed, and everything became extremely slow. The nomological laws broke away from the trio's control and were rapidly eroded by Jiu Po's ley line power. The Divine Emperor Heaven instantly stabilized the situation. Lu Wen. Zhao Renwang raised his head in shock and saw Lu Wen's figure standing calmly in the sky. His seven-starred Taoist robe was still hanging on his body as he overlooked the battlefield below. The Pantheon world. Indeed, Gu Nan's efficiency could not compare to Austin and the other two working together. At the same time, due to the strength of his own nomological laws, he could not directly find a top-notch lord. However, he was extremely adept at dealing with non-top-notch lords. The beast god's divine kingdom was already in an extremely dilapidated state. Bridges was gritting his teeth and holding on. The situation he was facing was even worse than Zhao Renwang's, because there was no one who could help him at all. Moreover, the unpredictable and unstoppable Gu Nan brought him pressure that was no less than Austin and the other two. Another moment later, the beast god's divine kingdom was completely swallowed by the shadows. All the living beings either fled or were completely killed by Gu Nan. Bridges was the only one left, a lone commander. Bridges stared coldly at Gu Nan. He had held on until the very last moment, and then he had run. That's right, he had waited until his divine kingdom had been completely destroyed by Gu Nan to buy himself enough time. Then, without another word, he had turned and run. Back when Austin had come up with the strategy of exchanging positions, he had already issued an order to all the lords. If they encountered a demon god targeting someone, then they were to think of a way to buy time and then run. If the divine kingdom was destroyed, it could be rebuilt. As long as they could protect themselves, as long as they won this battle, they would have a chance to start over. This was a battle where the two worlds were betting everything they had. No one could stay out of it. As Gu Nan watched Bridges' disappearing figure, a strange smile appeared on his face. If he thought that he could escape just like that, then he was really too naive. His figure disappeared on the spot, and then he quickly invaded the holy light divine kingdom. He found a familiar god and appeared before her. Chapter 529. Reading. Under normal circumstances, Gu Nan would not be interested in entering the holy light kingdom. This was Austin's base camp. Not only was there extreme holy light nomological laws everywhere, but it was also easy to attract Austin himself. For example, Gu Nan had entered the Holy Light Kingdom to attract Austin's attention and make him leave a mark on him so that he could lure Austin to the Divine Emperor Heaven. This time, he also had a special goal, and that goal was Sylvia. Ever since the war between the two worlds broke out, Sylvia had been kept in the Holy Light Kingdom by her brother in case she was kidnapped and turned into a hostage. After all, the Holy Light Country was the safest place in any other place. Unfortunately, even if Austin discovered the abnormality in the Holy Light Kingdom at this critical moment, he would not be able to rescue her in time. Jiupo and Zhao Renwang would not let him leave so easily. Even if he could leave, his invasion of the Divine Emperor Heaven would be in vain. In just a split second of hesitation, Sylvia had already been taken away by Gu Nan. Worlds in the heavens. Austin sensed what was happening in the Holy Light Kingdom, and his expression suddenly turned cold. However, he also knew that it was too late to return now. Therefore, his purification of the Divine Emperor Heaven became much more intense. Even Daisy and Bayer could not understand it. Did Austin have a personal feud with Zhao Renwang? On the other side, Sylvia was captured by Gu Nan without any preparation. At this moment, she was glaring at Gu Nan fiercely. "Evil God, just kill me!" Sylvia shouted. "Don't think that I will tell you anything, and don't think that you can threaten my brother." Sylvia did not need to think too much about Gu Nan's purpose in capturing her. Of course, it was for her brother. However, she was wrong. What Gu Nan wanted to do did not require her cooperation. He only needed her god's blood. Sylvia's nomological laws were completely sealed. She felt her vision blur, and she was brought to a dilapidated Holy Light Kingdom by Gu Nan. If it wasn't for the fact that there were still some patterns left in the God's Palace, and that Sylvia had been to the Beast Deity's divine kingdom before, she wouldn't have believed that this was once the kingdom of a god. "Beast God," Sylvia murmured. The next moment she felt a sharp pain on her wrist. She had been cut by the shadow blade, and divine blood was flowing out of her wrist incessantly. "You!" As soon as Sylvia opened her mouth, her voice was sealed by Gu Nan, and she couldn't say a single word. The divine body of a god was closely related to the divine title, and the blood of a god was even more precious than the blood of a dragon. It could even be said that the blood of a god itself came with an extremely strong power of laws. Sylvia's divine blood was absorbed by Gu Nan, and an extreme shadow was rapidly produced. It then followed the beast god patterns in the main shrine and extended a strange path in the void. Looking at this route, Sylvia could not help but widen her eyes. After all, this was something that extended from her body. She could vaguely feel what the end of this line was pointing to. That was Bridges, the beast god Bridges. My blood. Why does it have such power? Sylvia was in disbelief. Not only was she puzzled by the phenomenon itself, but she was even more puzzled by how Gu Nan knew about it. Of course, she could not bring herself to ask this, but Gu Nan seemed to understand what she was thinking. He said with a faint smile, "Austin is already the embodiment of laws. You, who are connected to him by blood, naturally have this characteristic as well." In the laws of the world of gods, bloodlines were an extremely close connection. When a god ascended to a new realm, all of his relatives and children would receive a certain upgrade. It was not a coincidence that the children of God usually had greater talent than the average person. Even though this upgrade was hidden, and most of the time, even the relatives themselves could not feel it. Of course, Sylvia knew this, but it was even rarer for a god to receive an upgrade because of his bloodline. Because of Austin, Sylvia also possessed the characteristics of laws. To a certain extent, her blood represented the shadow. And the law of shadow itself had the ability to track. This was common knowledge. Gu Nan had yet to reach level 15 and reach the pinnacle of nomological assimilation, so he could only borrow Sylvia's power for now. Bridges was hiding in a small plain, looking at his broken god nation while gnashing his teeth. He was doing his best to hide himself, hoping that they would win the war so that they could go all out to encircle this damned evil god. Thus, when the strange black thread slowly connected before him, Bridges had yet to realize what had happened. He only felt a pain at the back of his head. Gunnan's figure had appeared beside him at some point in time and landed a punch. Bridges did not even have time to react to this unguarded sneak attack. His divine body was instantly blasted apart, leaving nothing behind. The terrifying explosive power of the evil god's body was used to its pinnacle in a sneak attack. A lord had fallen in an instant. Gunnan harvested sin points once again, and then immediately set off for the next god kingdom. This time, his target was the Devil King Stanley. Bridges is dead. Austen's voice rang out again, this time with a rare gloomy tone. They had clearly been prepared, but Gunnan had still managed to kill a lord. The development of the situation had already exceeded his expectations. Exchanging a lord's god kingdom for the life of the enemy's Tao integration deity, or taking advantage of the enemy's lack of organization, was rather worthwhile. However, exchanging a life for a life was not worth it. But now that things had come to this, Austen and the others had no chance to turn back. They were riding a tiger and could not back down. The Lady of Darkness, Daisy, said with a sullen expression, "We can only rely on them to stall for time. Let's speed up." Bayard did not speak, but he used his actions to prove his attitude. The deathly aura started to spread wildly across the divine Emperor Heaven. Bayard no longer cared about his own exhaustion. Luwin was still standing in midair, using space-time laws to stall Austen and the others. But in a battle of this level, surprise attacks could only be used once. After the first wave of space-time laws was destroyed, it was very difficult for him to set up another one. The pressure on Jiu Po and Zhao Renwang was getting greater and greater. Even with Lu Wen's help, they were only able to delay the destruction of the divine Emperor Heaven by a little. For someone to be able to interfere in a fight of such a level was already an unexpected occurrence. Hoping for Lu Wen to have the ability to turn the tides was truly too much of a burden. Give up. Jiu Po sighed at Zhao Renwang. The astral boundary can still be rebuilt if it's destroyed. If Austen could understand this logic, the other Tao integration deities naturally understood it as well. It was a pity that the lords could make such a decision, but Zhao Renwang could not. The reason was very simple. The divine Emperor Heaven had been passed down for countless years before finally falling into his hands. Chapter 530. Read. Leave, Zhao Renwang said through gritted teeth. Even if I die, I will only die here. Jiu Po sighed again. He did not try to persuade Zhao Renwang any further. He calmed down and decided to fight the three lords until the very last moment. This was not because Jiu Po was being kind. After all, he did not feel any pressure. The longer he stayed in Divine Emperor Heaven, the safer he would be. In the grand scheme of things, the longer Divine Emperor Heaven was destroyed, the better the situation would be for the heavenly planes. It was still a race against time. Would Gunnan kill all the lords first, or would Austen and the other two deal with the main forces of the heavenly planes first? Gunnan had already arrived at Demon King Stanley's God Kingdom. In the mortal world, it was a strange plane known as the Demon Realm. That's right, the world of gods did have a demon realm. However, the demon realm was not a primary plane, but the god kingdom of the previous demon kings. When the god kingdom was targeted by Gunnan, Stanley immediately returned from the two-realm battlefield. However, what was rare was that he did not passively defend like the beast god. Instead, he revealed himself and stood in front of Gunnan. The Demon King was a rank 13 Lord God. He was considered one of the more senior lords among the lords. More importantly, he was very confident in himself. Choosing me as your next target will be the worst decision you've ever made. Stanley stood calmly in front of Gunnan and said with a faint smile, "You will be the sinner of this war." Of course, his reply was a punch from Gunnan. No one could use their body to take a punch from Gu Nan. Of course, Stanley could not either. His body was instantly destroyed by Gu Nan, but then another Stanley appeared. The Demon King's uniqueness was that as long as his power was not exhausted, he was almost immortal. His godheads were different from those of ordinary lords. They were scattered among the demons in the God Kingdom. It could be said that every demon was the source of his power. It's useless. Stanley shook his collar and smiled at Gu Nan. All your power is in your body. How are you going to kill me? Gu Nan shattered Stanley's body with another punch, and then took out a blood-red bead from his bosom. This was the divine country orb that he had used to store the terpsichore when he was at the second transition. Now that the terpsichore had been completely destroyed, all that was left were traces of the blood sacrifice. However, the divine kingdom orb was once again empty, so Gu Nan used it to deal with Stanley. Gu Nan pressed the orb of the God Kingdom into the ground and then stood there unhurriedly, watching Stanley, who had reappeared. This time, it was Stanley's turn to panic. The Divine Nation Pearl was just an ordinary tool. Regardless of its difficulty in obtaining it or its effects, it was basically at the level of a first transition item. Normally speaking, there was no way it could be used against sovereigns. In other words, during the normal course of the game, this item had never housed a main god's divine kingdom. This was not a problem of the upper limit of the item's strength. It was simply impossible. If he did that, he would immediately be surrounded and attacked by all of the sovereigns, and the collection process would be forced to come to a halt. No player would be able to deal with the combined attacks of the sovereigns. On the contrary, after the existence of the myriad worlds and the start of the war between the two worlds, Gu Nan had the opportunity to do whatever he wanted. After putting down the Divine Kingdom Pearl, Gu Nan activated it with his current powers. The demonic world was sucked into the Divine Kingdom Pearl at a speed visible to the naked eye. Stanley did not have the time to make sarcastic remarks. He started to activate the laws in a frenzy, and many demonic shadows pounced toward the Divine Kingdom Pearl in an attempt to prevent it from being engulfed. However, a demon king was a demon king after all. His godhead had given him an inexhaustible amount of power, but it also dispersed his explosive power. With Gu Nan holding the fort, no matter how many demonic shadows came, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. From another perspective, others might have the chance to abandon the Divine Kingdom and escape, but Stanley would not be able to do so even if he wanted to. This was because once he lost the Divine Kingdom, it would be equivalent to losing over 90% of his powers. He might not even be considered a main god anymore. A short while later, amidst Stanley's tragic bellows, the entire demonic world was sucked into the Divine Kingdom Pearl. Stanley originally had the chance to escape, but he did not choose to do so in the end. Instead, he followed his Divine Kingdom into the Divine Kingdom Pearl. Although he would be sealed this way, it was still better than losing most of his powers. After all, there was still hope of breaking the seal and escaping. However, he did not know that Gu Nan's goal was not just to get him to leave the battlefield, but to actually kill them all. After keeping the demonic world, Gu Nan tossed the Divine Kingdom Pearl in his hand, and then suddenly slapped it. The Divine Kingdom Pearl shattered without any suspense. Divine Emperor Heaven. The situation had reached its final moment. The three main gods had already occupied more than half of the astral world, and Zhao Renwang could only defend his last bit of territory. It could be said that at this point, there was no longer any meaning in whether he stayed or not, because the living beings in the astral world had already been wiped out. However, Zhao Renwang still had no intention of leaving. This was the human emperor. In ancient times, the human emperor had cut his way through the barren mountains and unruly rivers to carve out a path of survival. Now there was no turning back. Let's go. Jiupa came to Lu Wen's side and said. Divine Emperor Heaven no longer had any value, and they had to quickly adjust themselves to deal with the three main gods' next attack. Lu Wen nodded, and his figure retreated from Divine Emperor Heaven without hesitation. It was time for him to consider his own safety. Because looking at the other party's posture, after he took the lead this time, he might be the next to suffer. However, there was no other way. If he did not take action in Divine Emperor Heaven, the other astral worlds would not be able to withstand it. However, Lu Wen was better than Zhao Renwang in that he had made the decision to abandon the astral world. If he had no other choice, he had already made the preparations to abandon the astral world and run directly to the world of gods to participate in the extermination of the ordinary main gods. Victory was right before their eyes, and even Jiu Po and Lu Wen had retreated. Austin and the other two could finally heave a sigh of relief. Finish off Divine Emperor Heaven as soon as possible, Austin emphasized. Daisy and Bayer nodded at the same time. However, at this moment, Bayer's figure suddenly froze, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. The astral world has disappeared, and Stanley is dead. Austin suddenly turned his head and stared at Bayer's face. If stalling for time was their method of dealing with Gu Nan, then Stanley's demonic world was a trap. As long as Gu Nan stepped into it, he would definitely waste a lot of time. Given the complexity of the demonic world, even if Austin personally went there, he would not be able to take it down in a short period of time. But now, how did Gu Nan do it? Daisy said in a low voice, "The heretic god is a creature from ancient times. Perhaps he knows some secrets that we do not." "You believe it?" Austin looked at Daisy calmly, his gaze cold. "You want to retreat?" Chapter 531. Read. When she learned that Stanley had died at Gu Nan's hands, Daisy had indeed thought of retreating. No matter what, their top-notch battle prowess was stronger than that of the All Heavens. A battle between lords could not be decided by numbers. It was not too late to retreat now. More importantly, there were not many people left in the Darkness God system. Apart from herself and Bayer, the Darkness God system had a total of 5 lords. Now that Beast God Bridges and Demon King Stanley had both died at Gu Nan's hands, the Darkness God system only had the Lord of Nightmares and 2 others left. But the Light God system seemed to be in a worse state. Even Austin had to persevere. Daisy could only grit her teeth and follow. At a time like this, the world of gods had to be united. "Shall we go to Shi Jitian next?" Bayer asked. He hated that fellow who had interfered with their plans to the bone. But Austin said, "No, we'll start elsewhere. Lu Wen's abilities will only be better in Shi Jitian." Even though he also wanted to tear Lu Wen to pieces, Austin's mind was still clear. What they lacked the most now was time. They had to kill as many Dao integration practitioners as possible in the shortest time possible. They targeted the Divine Emperor Heaven, because Zhao Renwang had already suffered serious injuries and was not as strong as Yu Lian and Jiu Po. He was the most cost-effective target. More importantly, if they did not think of a way to force him back, they would not be able to hold on the main battlefield. Boswell had already returned to the 2-realm battlefield and joined forces with Eugene and the 3 Darkness Lords. Only after Lu Wen returned did they manage to fend off the attacks of the many Dao integration practitioners. This was the result even after the Master of Dark Azure had risked his life and defeated Li Ci and Hua Kuei of the Army Destroyer Heaven. Austin had a good grasp of the overall situation and immediately led the 2 to their next target, Martial Soldier Heaven. "Is it Zhou Jiming's turn?" Gu Nan naturally noticed the situation over at the All Heavens battlefield. He could not help but smile when he saw that Austin and the other 2 had already switched battles. Zhou Jiming, who was on the 2-realm battlefield, naturally rushed back to his astral realm. In any case, the All Heavens battlefield still had the advantage, and there was no pressure for now. But Gu Nan knew that as the number of people on both sides decreased, this advantage would become smaller and smaller. For the fewer people he had to deal with, the more sure Boswell would be. The gap between the top combat powers of the 2 sides was now beginning to show. Just one of the 4 peak overgods was enough to keep most people busy on the main battlefield. And right now, in front of Gu Nan stood another sovereign. To be more precise, it was only the shadow of a prime god. Not everyone had the courage to stand in front of Gu Nan with thousands of incarnations like Stanley. Ko-si, long time no see. Gu Nan's law of shadows continued to spread outwards, but his mouth was unhurriedly greeting Ko-si's. That's right, he was now standing in the Nightmare Kingdom. His next target was the Lord of Nightmares, Ko-si. No, it should be Gu Nan's next 3 target. After showing up in the Nightmare Kingdom and greeting Ko-si, he went directly to the Storm Kingdom. The Storm Overgod, Lehman, was shocked and hurriedly returned from the 2-realm battlefield, but a small number of his people had already been killed by the shadows. Next was naturally the Styx Kingdom. The Lord of the Styx River, Ogiest, seemed to understand Gu Nan's plan. He resisted the urge to return and stayed on the battlefield for a while longer. In the end, Gu Nan simply stayed in the Styx Kingdom. The Shadow Overgod spread his law of shadows at an extremely fast speed, killing off groups of Styx believers. Therefore, the Lord of the Styx River had no choice but to abandon the main battlefield and rush back to his own god kingdom. Gu Nan's move forced the 3 Dark Pantheon Lords to return, greatly increasing the pressure on the main battlefield. Boswell and Eugene were struggling to hold on. Austin and the others had also noticed Gu Nan's actions, but there was nothing they could do. This was because only Gu Nan could play such tricks. Only someone like Gu Nan, who was incomparably familiar with the world of gods, could freely travel between the 3 god kingdoms. On the other hand, Austin and the other 2 were completely clueless about the world of God. It was already difficult for them to find an astral plane, so how could they have the ability to come and go without a trace? With the 9 spirits around, they could completely block their space teleportation and waste even more time. Therefore, a large army had its advantages, and a guerrilla had its advantages. In terms of strategy, both sides were trying their best to make use of their own strength. Just like that, Gu Nan wandered between the 3 god kingdoms, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. Surprisingly, his progress was not much slower than if he were to go alone. This was also some of the experience Gu Nan had gained from dealing with the beast god. Gu Nan realized that when he used the law of shadows to kill the gods, most of the time was not spent on killing, but on gambling with the enemy lords. He would look for places that were not protected by the lords to attack, and find gaps in the protective zone. When Gu Nan was operating on multiple fronts, this time was saved and used in another god kingdom. It was no wonder that Gu Nan did not think of this at first. After all, in the game, he rarely encountered such a perfect farming opportunity. At most, he would fight some guerrilla warfare, and he would not think about saving time. Gu Nan was progressing at lightning speed, but Austin and the other 2 worked hard, and their progress was no slower than Gu Nan's. In just a short while, because Zhou Jiming was not as strong as Zhao Renwang, the martial soldier heaven was broken in the blink of an eye, and he could only abandon his astral plane and escape. Austin and the other 2 had no intention of pursuing him, because they had already achieved their goal. The Tao integration practitioners who had lost their astral plane definitely did not dare to show up in this battle, which was equivalent to losing their combat strength. Because if they dared to show up, they would definitely face the combined attacks of the elite lords. Next, Austin said coldly, the Tao integration practitioners were forced back one by one, and then their astral planes were destroyed one by one. The originally glorious 16 heavens became a land of death for a while. Even in the astral realms that had yet to be attacked, a large number of residents with considerable strength had fled. This was because no one knew if they would be the next to suffer. On the other hand, Gu Nan's god kingdom remained calm and peaceful. No one could enter, and Austin had no intention of attacking. This logic was the same as his untouched Paradise Heaven and 9 Souls Heaven. The star lords of these 3 astral planes were too powerful, and if they had the home advantage, they could very well drag them to death. At most, it would be meaningless for another person to attack the world of gods. This was the problem of a lack of information. If they understood the mechanism of the evil gods, they would definitely not have such a foolish idea. Unfortunately, no one else in this world understood the evil god.